If you're enjoying this video, smash that like button, subscribe, and hit the bell. Share it with your friends and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Every like and subscribe helps the channel grow. My name is William Cooper, but everyone around here just calls me Bill. I've been a park ranger at Yellowstone for almost 15 years now. Seen all kinds of things in this wilderness. Bears, wolves, elk, tourists doing stupid stuff. But nothing prepared me for what happened that winter of '62. It was early January, and man, was it cold. The thermometer outside my cabin read 20 below zero when I woke up that morning. I'm talking the kind of cold that freezes your spit before it hits the ground. But that's just life up here in winter. And I had my morning patrol to do. I pulled on my heavy wool socks, thermal underwear, and the thick ranger uniform that saved me from frostbite more times than I can count. After a quick breakfast of instant coffee and oatmeal, I headed out the door. The world outside was beautiful in that deadly way only winter can be. Everything sparkled like diamonds under the early morning sun. The pine trees stood tall, branches heavy with snow. My breath made thick clouds in front of my face as I walked toward the maintenance shed to grab my snowshoes. Another day in paradise, I muttered to myself as I strapped them on. First stop was the wildlife feeding stations we'd set up near the northern ridge. Winter's hard on the animals, and we try to help them through the worst of it. Strange thing though, there were hardly any tracks in the fresh snow. Usually you'd see deer prints, maybe some rabbit or fox marks. But today, almost nothing, just clean, untouched white powder everywhere. I pulled out my little notebook and jotted it down. Probably nothing, but you never know. Animals, sometimes, sense things we don't. I was about 2 hours into my patrol when my radio crackled to life. "Cooper, you there? Over." It was Jenkins from headquarters. "I'm here. What's up?" "Over. We've got a situation. 3 cross-country skiers haven't checked. In. They were supposed to return to their lodge yesterday evening. Nobody's seen them since." My stomach tightened. Missing folks in this weather. Not good at all. Any idea where they were headed? Over. Northern section near Lambert Creek. We're putting together search teams now. How far out are you? Over. I looked at my watch. About 3 miles from the station. I can head back and join the main search team or start heading north now. Over. Start north. We need eyes out there ASAP. It's supposed to get colder tonight. Over. Roger that. I'll radio in once I reach the northern section. Cooper out. Back at my cabin, I grabbed my emergency pack. Extra food, first aid supplies, emergency tea, blankets, flares, the works. I spread my map across the kitchen table, tracing possible routes with my finger. The skiers' planned trail took them near Frostbite Canyon. I paused, my finger hovering over the spot. Frostbite Canyon. Old Man Hawkins and some of the other long-timers always got quiet when that place came up, especially in winter talk. Said it wasn't natural how cold it got in there, colder than anywhere else in the park. Most of them wouldn't go near it between November and March. Superstitious nonsense, probably. But I'd worked here long enough to know that sometimes the old-timers' nonsense had some truth to it. Before heading out, I stopped by my bedside table and touched the photo of Marilyn. Her smile still made my heart ache, even 2 years after losing her. Pneumonia took her quick during that terrible winter of '60. Sometimes I still hear her voice when the wind blows just right. "Wish me luck, sweetheart," I whispered, then zipped up my heavy parka and headed out. By the time I reached the northern section, the sky had darkened much earlier than it should have. Only 2 p.m., but it looked like dusk already. Heavy clouds rolled in and the wind picked up, cutting through my layers like they were nothing. I adjusted my snowshoes and pushed forward into Frostbite Canyon. The temperature seemed to drop with each step. The wind howled between the rock walls, carrying sounds that made the hair on my neck stand up, almost like voices crying out. Could be just the wind, but it sure sounded human. "Hello?" I called out, my voice swallowed by the vastness. "Park ranger, anyone there?" Nothing but that same eerie howling. I trudged through the snow for 6 hours, calling and searching until my throat was raw. The light was almost gone when I spotted something sticking up from the snow, a ski pole planted upright like a marker. Nobody leaves equipment like that by accident. Beside it was something odd, a perfectly round depression in the snow, about 6 feet across. Not made by any animal I knew, no tracks leading to or from it. Just a perfect circle, like someone had pressed a giant cookie cutter into the snow. I radioed headquarters, but got nothing but static. The temperature had dropped dramatically, the display on my thermometer now reading 40 below. My eyelashes were freezing together, and I knew I had to find shelter soon. A small cave appeared in the canyon wall, just big enough for one person. I hurried toward it, desperate for any protection from the brutal cold. As I got closer, I noticed something strange around the entrance. Deep scratches in the rock, like something with huge claws had tried to dig its way in or out. I hesitated, but the biting cold made the decision for me. I set up camp inside, built a small fire, and heated up some beans and coffee. As the warmth returned to my fingers and toes, I tried the radio again. Still nothing but crackling static. That night, I dreamed of Marilyn. She was standing in the snow outside the cave, calling my name, but her voice was wrong somehow, deeper, raspier. I woke with a start, shivering. My fire had gone out, though I could have sworn I'd added enough wood to last the night. The darkness was complete, but something felt wrong. The air smelled like copper and rot. Fumbling for my flashlight, I switched it on and pointed it toward the cave entrance. My heart nearly stopped. A circle of dead deer surrounded my camp, their bodies arranged in a perfect ring. Their rib cages were torn open, splayed wide like bloody flowers, but from the inside out, as if something had burst from within them. And in the distance, just at the edge of my flashlight's beam, something stood watching me. Something tall and impossibly thin, with the skull of a deer where its head should be and limbs that bent all wrong. I blinked, and it was gone. But I knew I wasn't alone anymore. I couldn't move. My body felt frozen in place as I stared at that thing in the distance. It stood perfectly still, like a statue, but I knew it was watching me. It had to be at least 15 feet tall, thin as a rail, with arms that hung down past where its knees should be. And that head. That deer skull head, with antlers that reached toward the sky like dead branches. I blinked hard, hoping it was just my tired mind playing tricks. But when I opened my eyes, it was still there, only it had moved closer without making a sound. In the snow, my training kicked in. I grabbed my pack and my rifle, backing away slowly. Never run from a predator. That's the first rule of the wilderness. But whatever this was, it wasn't like any predator I'd ever seen. The radio at my hip suddenly crackled to life, making me jump. Through the static, I heard a voice. Marilyn's voice. "Bill, help me, please." My blood turned to ice. That wasn't possible. Marilyn had been dead for 2 years. I knew that. I'd buried her myself. The radio light wasn't even on, showing it wasn't receiving a real transmission. "Bill, I'm so cold." Her voice was coming through clearer now, pleading, desperate. I knew it couldn't be real, but I found myself answering. "Anyway, Marilyn, where are you?" The figure in the distance tilted its head like a curious dog. Then it raised one long, skinny arm and pointed deeper into the canyon. Against every instinct telling me to run the other way, I found myself moving toward the voice. The snow was deep, almost to my waist in some places, but somehow that thing moved through it without leaving tracks. "I'm coming, Marilyn," I said, though I knew it couldn't be her. The voice led me around a bend in the canyon, and that's when I found one of the missing skiers. The man hung from a tree branch, about 10 feet off the ground. His bright blue ski jacket was torn open, and his chest, God help me, his chest was hollowed out, like something had eaten everything inside, but he was still breathing. His eyes fluttered open as I approached, unfocused and glazed with frost. His lips moved and I leaned in close to hear. "It wears your hunger," he whispered, his breath visible in the freezing air. Then his eyes rolled back and frost crystals formed across them like a glittering mask. He was gone. I stumbled backward, falling into the snow. My compass was spinning wildly, the needle whirling in circles, as if we were standing on the North Pole itself. The temperature dropped even further. I could feel it. My breath now froze instantly, tiny ice particles tinkling like broken glass as they fell. I had to get out of there. I turned to run back the way I came, but the canyon looked different somehow. The walls were higher, the path narrower. Had I taken a wrong turn? Then the blizzard hit. It came out of nowhere, a wall of white so thick I couldn't see my hand in the front of my face. The wind screamed through the canyon, but sometimes in the howling I swore I could hear laughter. Sometimes, when the snow parted for just a second, I caught glimpses of antlers moving through the whiteness. Always just at the edge of vision, never straight on. I pushed forward, fighting through snow that now reached my waist. Each step was harder than the last. The strange thing was, it felt like I was sinking deeper with each step, as if there was no solid ground beneath the snow, just more emptiness. Then I saw it clearly for the first time. The Wendigo. That's what the old Algonquin stories called them, spirits of winter and starvation. I'd heard the legends from native guides but never believed them. Now I was staring at one. It stood fully, revealed in a clearing, its body a nightmare of bone and stretched skin. 15 feet tall, with a rib cage you could see through its tight leathery hide. Arms too long, fingers like twigs, and that deer skull head, with black emptiness where the eyes should be. Pure instinct took over. I pulled my service revolver and fired. All 6 shots, straight at its chest. The bullets passed right through it, as if it was made of fog. The creature didn't even flinch. It just tilted its head again, like it was thinking about me. Then it spoke. "Bill Cooper," it said in my own voice. Not a copy, not an imitation. My voice, exactly as I hear it in my own head. "You were scared of the dark until you were 12, it continued. "You broke your arm, falling from the Johnson's apple tree when you were 9. You never told anyone it was because you were trying to look into Susan Johnson's window." I felt sick. I'd never told anyone about that, not even Marilyn. "How do you know that?" I asked, my voice shaking. "I know you, William Cooper. I've always known you." I ran. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I turned and ran as fast as I could through the deep snow, my lungs burning with each frozen breath. I headed for a stand of pine trees, hoping to lose it among the trunks. As I reached the trees, I noticed something carved into the bark. Names and dates, dozens of them, going back decades. And there, freshly carved it seemed, was my own name, William Cooper, 1962. Beside it were other William Coopers, 1925, 1889, 1843. My family had been in this region for generations. My grandfather had worked these same forests, his father before him. The Wendigo's voice, my voice, called from behind me. "We are bound, you and I. We always have been." I kept running, deeper into the woods, desperate to escape its words and what they might mean. I couldn't outrun it. The Wendigo wasn't even chasing me, not really. It would just appear ahead of me, standing motionless, waiting. No matter which direction I turned, there it was. It was playing with me. The trees around me began to change. First, ice crept up their trunks, coating them in a thick, glassy layer. Then, with sharp, cracking sounds, like gunshots, they shattered. Ice shards flew through the air, some narrowly missing my face. One sliced across my cheek, leaving a thin line of blood that froze almost instantly. This thing, whatever it was, could control the very cold itself. My radio crackled again, but this time it wasn't Marilyn's voice. It was a man, his words broken, up by static. Day 3 of search, no sign of Johnson's team. Temperature dropping too fast, not natural. Then another voice, a woman this time. We've lost contact with base camp. Strange tracks in the snow. Something followed us from the canyon. More voices came through, one after another. Different people, different decades from the sound of the equipment and their way of talking. All search parties, all in this. On canyon. All ending the same way, in screams or desperate prayers cut short by static. I realized with a sickening feeling that this had been happening for years. Decades. And nobody knew. Or if they did, they weren't talking about it. I needed to find shelter again, to think. My fingers and toes were going numb despite my heavy gloves and boots. The cold here wasn't just weather, it was something alive, something hungry. Following a narrow path between ice-covered rocks, I spotted something that made me stop short. The other two missing skiers, or what was left of them. Their bodies were laid out in a pattern, limbs arranged at careful angles. Their blood had frozen in dark pools around them, forming shapes that looked almost like letters in some alphabet I couldn't read. Together, they formed an arrow pointing toward a dark opening in the canyon wall, another cave. I didn't want to go in there. Every instinct screamed against it. But the wind was picking up again, and I knew I'd freeze to death in minutes if I stayed outside. The cave was my only option. The entrance was low, forcing me to crouch and crawl inside. My flashlight revealed a space about the size of my cabin's main room, with strange marks covering the walls. As I moved deeper, my light fell on something out of place. A wooden chest, old but not ancient, pushed against the back wall. Inside were journals, dozens of them, the oldest dated 1879. The pages were brittle, yellowed with age, but the handwriting was clear enough. They were accounts of other encounters, other searches. Men and women lost in these woods, facing the same creature I was facing now. One journal from 1923 caught my eye. The writer described the Wendigo in detail, just as I had seen it. But he wrote something else too, that these creatures appeared in cycles, roughly every 40 years, and that they targeted specific families, hunting them through generations. My hands shook as I turned another page and saw a familiar name, Thomas Cooper, my grandfather. He'd been part of a search team in 1922, the only survivor. Next to the journals was a crumbling leather pouch. Inside were pages torn from even older books, along with what looked like animal hide with paintings on it. Native American pictographs showing the tall, antlered figure of the Wendigo. Beside the images were warnings written in several languages, including English. It hungers not for flesh, but for spirit. It consumes your hunger, makes it its own, and leaves you empty to be filled with its cold. One page showed the Wendigo surrounded by flames, not running from fire, but seemingly being destroyed by it. A note in faded ink beside it read, "Sacred. Fire alone can cleanse the spirit of winter. Normal flame will not suffice. Sacred fire. What did that even mean? I was startled by a sudden pain in my fingers. Looking down, I saw my fingertips turning black with frostbite. But this wasn't normal frostbite. I could actually see it spreading, crawling up my fingers like dark vines, getting faster as the Wendigo's presence grew stronger. I fumbled with my gloves, trying to warm my hands, when a movement at the cave entrance caught my eye. Marilyn stood there, her figure backlit by the snow's eerie glow. She was wearing the same blue dress she'd been buried in. "Bill," she said softly, "come with me. I can show you how to escape." But something was wrong. Her movements were jerky, unnatural. She took a step forward, and her foot didn't quite touch the ground. Her smile was too wide, her eyes too dark. "You're not Marilyn," I said, backing away. Her face twitched, the smile stretching even wider. "Don't you love me anymore, Bill? Don't you want to be with me?" "Marilyn is dead. So will you be if you stay here." "Not," Marilyn said, her voice deepening, distorting. "Come outside. It's the only way." I knew it was a trap. The Wendigo was using my grief, my love for Marilyn, against me. It was trying to lure me back into the killing cold. Instead, I reached for my pack and pulled out my last flare. I also took out my flask of whiskey. Don't judge, the nights get lonely out here. Looking around the cave, I spotted a small pool of sticky pine sap that had dripped down the wall. The pictographs showed sacred fire. I didn't know what made fire sacred, but I figured alcohol and pine sap would make it burn hotter and longer than normal. It was worth a try. I mixed the whiskey with the pine sap in a small tin cup, creating a sticky, flammable paste. As I worked, Not Marilyn's shape in the doorway began to shift and stretch, growing taller, thinner, until the Wendigo stood there in her place. "William Cooper," it said again in my voice. "You cannot fight what you are becoming." I didn't understand what it meant, but I didn't have time to figure it out. I struck the flare against the cave wall, and it burst to life with a bright red flame. Then I dipped it into my mixture. The flame turned a brilliant blue-white, so bright it hurt to look at. The Wendigo shrieked, a sound so horrible and loud that it shattered the ice outside the cave for what must have been miles around. The radio at my hip exploded in a shower of sparks. I had found its weakness. Now I just had to figure out how to use it to escape this nightmare. With the flaming mixture held out in front of me like a shield, I moved toward the cave entrance. The Wendigo backed away, its empty eye sockets somehow showing fear. "Stay back," I shouted, my voice stronger than I felt. I stepped outside into the swirling snow. The storm had gotten worse, but the area right around me was clear, as if the fire was pushing the blizzard away. The Wendigo circled me at a distance, always keeping just out of reach of the flame. But I could tell it was angry now. The air got even colder, so cold it hurt to breathe. Suddenly the Wendigo charged, moving faster than anything that big should be able to move. It rushed straight at me, its body a blur of bone and leather skin. I swung the flaming mixture at it, and where the fire touched, the creature's flesh began to burn. The Wendigo let out another ear-splitting shriek and jumped back. Where the flame had touched it, the leathery skin bubbled and turned black. The fire worked. I started moving back toward the canyon entrance, keeping the flame between me and the creature. If I could just make it back to the main trail, maybe I could get help. The Wendigo wasn't going to let me go that easily. It charged again, this time from the side. I wasn't fast enough. Its long, bony fingers caught my shoulder, sending waves of paralyzing cold through my body. The pain was like nothing I'd ever felt before, like my very blood was freezing inside my veins. I stumbled, but managed to stay on my feet. As I regained my balance, the flame from my makeshift weapon touched the snow at my feet. The snow melted instantly, much faster than it should have, and what I saw underneath made my stomach turn. Bodies, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, preserved in the ice. Men and women in clothing from different eras, some that looked like they'd been there since the 1800s, others more recent. All frozen with looks of terror on their faces. This place was a graveyard. The Wendigo's collection. The creature rushed. Me again. This time I was ready. I swung the flame in a wide arc, catching it across its chest. The fire spread quickly, eating away at the dry, leathery skin. The Wendigo's body lit up like kindling, flames racing across its limbs and up to its dear skull head. But it didn't stop. Burning from head to toe, the Wendigo charged right at me, wrapping its flaming arms around my body. My uniform caught fire, and pain seared through me as the flames bit into my skin. We grappled in the snow, rolling over and over. Its touch was a horrible contradiction, burning hot on the outside but freezing cold underneath, like its insides were made of ice. As we fought, I looked into the empty sockets where its eyes should be. In their blackness, I saw something impossible, reflections, but not of the present. I saw myself, but also not myself. Men who looked like me, dressed in clothes from different times, all fighting this same battle, all losing. Was the Wendigo, showing me my ancestors, Had my family been fighting this thing for generations? We are bound, it whispered in my voice. Your blood called to me. Your hunger feeds me. I didn't understand, but I didn't need to. I just needed to end this. With all my strength, I pushed the burning Wendigo toward the frozen lake I'd passed earlier. The ice looked solid, but I knew from experience that appearances could be deceiving. We crashed onto the lake's surface, the Wendigo's weight and the heat from the flames causing the ice to crack immediately. Spider-web fractures spread out from under us. If I go, you go with me, I growled through clenched teeth. The ice gave way with a loud crack, and we plunged into the freezing water below. The shock of it nearly made me pass out. It was so cold, it felt like being stabbed with 1,000 knives. Underwater, the Wendigo's flames went out, but it kept fighting. Its long fingers wrapped around my throat, squeezing. But something strange was happening to it. As we struggled in the frigid darkness, the Wendigo's form began to change. Its limbs shortened. The antlers retracted into the skull, which was becoming more human-like by the second. The face forming beneath the melting deer skull was horribly familiar. It was my face. My lungs screamed for air as I struggled to understand what I was seeing. The Wendigo wasn't just hunting my family. Somehow, it was becoming me, or I was becoming it. This was what happened to my ancestors. Why they disappeared. Why the Wendigo returned every 40 years. Darkness started closing in around my vision. I was drowning, freezing, dying. With the last of my strength, I pulled the hunting knife from my belt and drove it upward through the ice, creating a small hole. I tried to pull myself toward it, but my limbs wouldn't respond anymore. The cold had taken too much from me. The Wendigo's fingers were still around my throat, but they were changing, becoming more human as mine became longer, thinner. The last thing I saw before consciousness left me was my own face on the Wendigo, looking peaceful, almost asleep. And my hands, now long and skeletal, still gripping its throat. Then darkness took me. I should have died in that lake. Maybe I did. 3 days later, at least that's what they told me, search teams found my equipment scattered across the snow. My backpack, my radio, my snowshoes. They found barefoot human tracks leading deeper into the wilderness, though they couldn't understand how anyone could walk barefoot in such cold without dying. They never found my body. Strange thing is, I remember being found. I remember walking out of those woods, though my memories are confused, dreamlike. I remember being so hungry, but that couldn't be right, because I'm still here in Frostbite Canyon. I'm still waiting. The cold doesn't bother me anymore. Nothing does. The rangers at headquarters started getting strange radio calls about a week after I disappeared. Someone using my call sign, my voice, guiding lost hikers to safety in Frostbite Canyon. At first, they thought it was really me, that I'd somehow survived and was continuing my duties. They sent out teams to find me, to help me. But whenever the search parties got close to where the signal seemed to be coming from, the voice would go silent or move somewhere else. Always deeper into the canyon. Always to places where the cold was most deadly. None of the hikers who followed my voice were ever seen again. I know all this because I can hear the rangers' radios. I can hear everything in my forest now. Every snapped twig, every frightened breath, every racing heartbeat. I can smell fear on the wind miles away, and I'm always so hungry. Winter became spring, then summer, then fall, and now winter has returned again. The first heavy snow fell yesterday. Already I can feel myself growing stronger as the cold deepens. 3 hikers entered the northern section this morning. Young, healthy, full of life and warmth. I've been watching them set up camp, listening. To them, laugh and tell stories. One of them said something about reports of missing people in this area, but his friend told him those were just old legends, if only they knew. I've started calling to them on their radio, using my old ranger voice. telling them there's a storm coming, that they should follow my directions to a safe shelter. They're nervous, but they trust the authority in my voice. They're packing up now, getting ready to follow my instructions. They'll be here soon. The search dogs won't follow my scent. The rangers brought them out last month, trying once again to find some trace of me. The dogs got as far as the edge of the canyon, where they found my old uniform hanging from a tree branch. The animals howled and pulled at their leashes, refusing to go any further. Smart animals, dogs, they know a predator when they smell one. The rangers found my journal last week. I left it where they would find it, though the handwriting toward the end might be hard to recognize as mine. My fingers were changing by then, growing longer, the joints rearranging themselves. The last few entries talk about my growing hunger, about the truth of survival I was beginning to understand. There's a certain poetry to it, really. When you're starving, truly starving, you'll do anything to survive. You'll eat anything. You might even say, hunger changes you. But it goes deeper than that. The Wendigo isn't just a creature. It's a spirit of hunger that never ends. It finds people who are desperate, who would do anything to live, and it offers them a terrible bargain. Become the monster, or become its meal. My grandfather made that choice in 1922. Now I understand why he never talked about his time in these woods, why he would wake up screaming on winter nights. Last month, the park sent a helicopter with thermal cameras over the canyon, looking for any sign of me or the missing hikers. The pilot reported seeing a single figure standing in a clearing, completely motionless. When they checked the thermal reading, the figure registered at 50 degrees below zero, colder than the air around it. That was me, watching them, wanting them. I've started marking a map with red X's, showing where each person has disappeared since 1879. When you connect the marks, they form a pattern, a symbol I now recognize from the Native American drawings in the cave. A binding symbol, meant to contain something ancient and hungry. The pattern is almost complete. Visitors to the park say they sometimes hear my voice at night, especially if they wander away from their campsites. I give them directions, safety instructions, friendly advice, just beyond where their flashlights can reach. Most are smart enough to stay where they are. Some aren't. The new rangers assigned to this area start to change after a while. They develop strange appetites. Nothing satisfies their hunger anymore. They dream of running through snow on all fours, of the taste of fear, of the warmth inside living bodies. I know because I can see their dreams. I can call to them, my kin. The wildlife cameras they set up to try to spot me only caught one image, just my face partially hidden behind a tree. But it doesn't quite look like me anymore. My features are longer, sharper, and there are things growing from my head that look like the beginnings of antlers. I've been busy in Bill Cooper's old cabin. I found 60 years' worth of missing persons. Reports stacked neatly on the desk. I've been adding notes to them in different handwritings, some from the 1930s, some from the 1880s, some that don't look human at all. It's important to keep good records. Last night I visited Marilyn's grave. I didn't go there to mourn. I went because I was curious if I could still feel anything for her. I dug up her coffin from the inside, pushing through the earth like it was nothing. I took her wedding ring and hung it on a branch at the entrance to the canyon, a warning perhaps, or an invitation. The park administrators have quietly renamed Frostbite Canyon on the new maps. Cooper's Pass, they're calling it now. A nice tribute, they think. But rangers have noticed something odd. When they enter the area, their GPS devices still display the original name. Some places can't be renamed. Some hungers can't be satisfied. Winter is here again, and I am patient. I have all the time in the world now. In about 40 years, someone else from my bloodline will come to these woods. A great-nephew, perhaps, or a distant cousin who feels drawn here without knowing why. And the cycle will continue. Until then, I'll wait in the cold and the dark, in the quiet of my canyon. And if you're ever hiking in Yellowstone during winter, and you hear a friendly ranger's voice calling to you from just beyond your campfire's light, run. Run as fast as you can in the other direction, because I'm always so very, very hungry. My name is Franklin Begay, but everyone calls me Frank. I'm 29 years old and just got back from fighting in Korea 6 months ago. Now I work as a park ranger at Mesa Verde National Park in Colorado, the same place where my ancestors, the Navajo, people once lived alongside the ancient cliff dwellers. The first thing I noticed when I came home was how dry everything was. The worst drought in history, 56 days without a drop of rain. The earth was cracked open like an old leather wallet left too long in the sun. From my lookout tower, I could see dust devils dancing across the empty landscape, spinning and twisting, like lost spirits. Another scorcher, I muttered to myself, wiping sweat from my forehead with my sleeve. The ancient Pueblo walls were cracking from the dryness, revealing bits of pottery and old tools that had been hidden for centuries. Any other time, this would excite the archaeologists, but now it just felt wrong, like we were seeing things never meant to be uncovered. I touched the small leather pouch hanging around my neck, my grandfather's parting gift before I left for war. This will protect you from things worse than men with guns, he had told me. I didn't believe in the old ways anymore, not after what I'd seen in Korea. Bullets and bombs were real. The monsters in the old stories were not. At least that's what I told myself. The radio on my belt crackled to life. Begay, you hearing about these cattle deaths over at Ute Mountain? It was Thompson, the ranger from the East Station. Yeah, I answered. Third report this week. The ranchers found their cattle with parts missing. Tongues, eyes, and reproductive organs removed, with cuts so clean they said only a surgeon could make them. The local sheriff blamed it on coyotes, but I'd tracked coyotes my whole life. They don't cut like surgeons. Speaking of coyotes, I spotted one through my binoculars, perched on a mesa about half a mile away. It was watching my tower, standing perfectly still. I checked my watch. 3 hours later it hadn't moved, hadn't blinked, hadn't shifted even an inch. That evening a family of tourists stopped by my station, looking confused. A ranger told. There was a special tour of the ancient Kevers today, the father said, pointing toward a restricted area we kept visitors away from. But we couldn't find the meeting spot. I frowned. No tours go to those Kevers, sir. They're off limits. Unsafe and sacred to local tribes. The mother looked concerned, but the ranger was so specific. Tall man, Navajo like you, had the same name tag, Begay. A chill ran down my spine despite the heat. I had been alone in this section all day. There was no other ranger Begay in the park. That night I couldn't sleep. The words of my grandfather kept echoing in my head. The drought brings things out of hiding, things that have waited a long time. I told myself I was being foolish. There were logical explanations for everything. The coyote was just an animal, doing what animals do. The tourists must have misread my name tag or spoken to a different ranger. The cattle were killed by some predator, maybe a mountain lion. But deep down, in a place I didn't want to acknowledge, I knew something wasn't right at Mesa Verde. Something that had perhaps been waiting for someone like me to return. The next morning, I went out on patrol early. The sun was just starting to heat up the dusty ground when I found something strange. Footprints in the dirt. They looked like someone walking barefoot, normal human prints, until they suddenly stopped. Or rather, they didn't stop. They changed. Right in the middle of a step, the human foot became a coyote paw, like someone turned into an animal mid-stride. I knelt down to look closer, my heart beating a little faster. I told myself there must be a simple explanation, maybe 2 sets of tracks that just happened to line up perfectly. But deep down, I knew better. You're being crazy, Frank, I whispered to myself. Get it together. The radio at my hip buzzed. Big A, we've got a situation. At Petroglyph Point, abandoned vehicle, possible missing persons. When I arrived at Petroglyph Point 30 minutes later, I found a blue station wagon with its doors wide open and the engine still running. A family's belongings were scattered around. Maps, water bottles, a picnic basket with half-eaten sandwiches. It looked like they'd left in a hurry. Hello, I called out. Park ranger, anyone here? No answer came back, just the whisper of the wind through the canyon. I noticed a camera on the front seat. Picking it up, I flipped through the viewfinder to see the last photos taken. Most were normal tourist shots. The family posing by landmarks, ancient cliff dwellings, sunset over the mesas. Then I froze. The last photo showed a park ranger standing on a cliff edge, pointing toward an old Kever. The ranger's face was blurred, but he was wearing my uniform, down to the scuff on the left. Boot I'd gotten climbing over a fence last week. The temperature suddenly dropped, like someone had opened a freezer door. I looked up to see dark clouds rolling in, the first we'd seen in almost 2 months. They twisted into shapes that looked almost human, with long, stretched limbs reaching down toward the earth. Back at headquarters, I learned the family had been found walking along the highway, confused and dehydrated. They claimed they'd followed a ranger's instructions to see the real Mesa Verde, but couldn't remember anything else. Later that day, I discovered something else troubling. Someone had painted ancient symbols around the park's edges, symbols I recognized from my grandfather's teachings. They were prohibition marks, warnings used by different tribes to mark places where evil dwelled. The lab tests came back showing the red paint contained human blood. My colleague Matthew Tsosier, another Navajo ranger, requested a transfer to day shifts only. "I can't work nights anymore, Frank," he told me, his voice low. "My grandfather saw something out there last week, said it was wearing a ranger uniform, walking backward up the cliffs at midnight. Said it had your face, but it wasn't you." I laughed it off, but Matthew didn't smile. That afternoon, I drove out to check on the archaeological team working near Cliff Palace. They'd been excavating a newly discovered chamber that the drought had revealed. When I arrived, the site was buzzing with activity and whispered conversations. "What did you find?" I asked Dr. Whitaker, the lead archaeologist. She hesitated before answering. "Remains, very unusual ones." She led me to a tarp where they'd laid out the bones. I'm not easily shaken, not after what I saw in Korea, but this made my stomach turn. The skeleton had human-like features, but with arms and legs too long, joints that bent in wrong directions. And where the head should have been, they'd found a coyote skull, positioned as if it belonged there. "This was intentional," Dr. Whitaker said quietly. "Not a burial, more like a transformation that never finished." That night, I dreamed of Korea again. The familiar nightmare of the hill we took at heavy cost. But this time, as my fellow soldiers fell around me, their faces changed just before they hit the ground. Korean features stretched and morphed into animal snouts and teeth. They died with coyote eyes staring at me. I woke up gasping, my hand automatically reaching for the medicine pouch around my neck. For the first time since returning from war, I wondered if my grandfather had been right all along. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. Every day, the strange events at Mesa Verde got worse. One night, while sitting in my tower, my radio started picking up voices. At first, I thought it was just other rangers talking, but then I realized they were speaking Navajo, backward Navajo, code, the same secret language I used during the war. No one was supposed to know that code, except the Navajo Marines like me. The voices were describing places in the park, sacred spots where ancient rituals took place, places most people didn't even know existed. "This isn't happening," I said to myself, turning the radio dial, but the voices continued no matter what channel I switched to. The next morning I got a call about strange marks found near balcony house. When I arrived, I discovered footprints, boot prints to be exact. They looked exactly like the tread pattern of my custom ranger boots, with the same worn spot on the left heel that I'd been meaning to get fixed. The problem? I hadn't been to Balcony House in over 2 weeks. I knelt down and measured the prints. With my hand, the stride length matched mine perfectly. It was like I had been here, but I hadn't. That afternoon, I drove to the Navajo reservation to visit my uncle, a respected elder. I needed answers, even if they came from the old beliefs I'd tried to leave behind. "You were foolish to think the war was your only battle," my uncle said as we sat outside his home. "Your grandfather knew what lived in these canyons. The Yi, Naldlushi, Skinwalkers." "Those are just stories," I said, but my voice shook a little. My uncle shook his head. "They are witches who can transform by wearing animal skins. They feed on fear and life itself. The drought has made them hungry, and something about you has caught their attention." I thought about the coyote that watched me for hours without moving, the ranger the tourists saw with my name tag, the footprints that transformed mid-step. "How do I stop it?" I asked. "First, you must admit it exists," he replied. "A skinwalker's greatest power is making you doubt your own mind." When I returned to the park that evening, 3 visitors were in the medical station. They had strange rashes spreading across their skin, rashes shaped like handprints. "A nice ranger showed us a shortcut," a woman explained, scratching her arm where the rash burned brightest. "He had your name on his tag, said you were his cousin." The head ranger called me into his office later. "These people all described you begay, but park records show you were at the fire tower during those hours." "I was," I insisted. "Someone or something is pretending to be me." The doubt in his eyes was clear. He thought I was lying or losing my mind. That night, after a long shift, I fell into an exhausted sleep. I dreamed I was running through the park on all fours, seeing through different eyes, smelling things no human should be able to smell. I woke suddenly at 3 a.m., gasping for air. My hands were covered in fresh dirt. My boots, which I'd cleaned before bed, were caked with red clay, the kind found only near the ancient burial grounds that were strictly off-limits, even to park rangers. I stumbled to the bathroom and scrubbed my hands until they were raw, trying to remember what had happened after I fell asleep. There was nothing, just a black hole in my memory, about 8 hours long. When I returned to my room, I noticed something caught on my uniform buttons hanging by the door. Tufts of coyote fur that hadn't been there when I went to sleep. I stood in front of my small mirror, examining my face for any sign of what? I didn't know what I was looking for. But as I stared, I could have sworn my reflection smiled differently than I did, its lips forming words in Navajo. "Soon you'll remember." I backed away from the mirror, heart pounding in my chest. Whatever was happening at Mesa Verde, it wasn't just around me anymore. It was inside me, too. The next day, I couldn't focus on my work. My hands were shaking as I filled out reports. Every shadow made me jump, and the constant feeling of being watched wouldn't go away. During my patrol, I noticed something strange about the ancient petroglyphs, the rock carvings left by people who lived here centuries ago. They'd changed. I'd walked this same path 100 times and knew every carving by heart. But now, some of the human figures had what looked like ranger hats, and their stone fingers pointed directly toward park headquarters. "That's impossible," I whispered, touching the fresh-looking marks. "Rock doesn't change overnight." I took photos, planning to show them to Dr. Whitaker, but when I developed them later, the images showed only the original carvings, no ranger hats, no pointing fingers. That night, Matthew Tsosi invited me to his home just outside the park. He looked nervous. "I had my uncle set up wildlife cameras near your lookout tower," he admitted. "I needed to see what's been watching you." He laid out several photos on his kitchen table. They showed my tower at night, and in 3 of them, a figure was walking. The perimeter, it was me or something wearing my face, but the way it moved was all wrong. In one photo, its head was turned too far, looking almost backward. In another, its arms hung at unnatural angles. In the worst one, its fingers were stretched out, twice as long as human fingers should be. My stomach churned. When were these taken? 2 nights ago, when you told everyone you were at home with the flu. I had been home, hadn't I? I remembered lying in bed, taking medicine, watching the shadows on my ceiling. But now doubt crept in. Matthew pulled out a small pouch of corn pollen used in Navajo blessing ceremonies. My grandfather taught me how to see what others can't, he said quietly. May I? I nodded, and he sprinkled the yellow powder in a circle around us. He sang softly in Navajo, words I hadn't heard since I was a child. The pollen seemed to glow slightly in the dim light. Something wore you in Korea, he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper, a moment when you were between life and death. It followed you home. The words hit me like a physical blow. I remembered the moment, pinned down under heavy fire, a bullet grazing my head. I'd blacked out for just minutes, but when I woke up, something had felt different. I'd blamed it on the head injury. How do you know that? I asked. The pollen shows tracks, spiritual tracks. Yours are doubled, like something's walking in your footsteps. Has been for a long time. The next day, I noticed my service revolver was missing from its holster. I searched everywhere, but couldn't find it. I was about to report it when a visitor mentioned seeing something shiny near the old crossroads. I found my gun there, half buried in the dirt. When I opened the chamber to check it, my blood ran cold. The bullets had been removed. In their place were tiny white objects, human teeth, baby teeth by the look of them. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in my cabin with all the lights on, jumping at every sound. Around midnight, I watched as my shadow on the wall moved while I sat perfectly still. I must have dozed off eventually because I woke to a sound at my window. Tap, 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 like fingernails on glass. When I looked, no one was there, but on the ground outside were perfect bare footprints in the dust, leading away from my window and transforming mid-step into coyote tracks. The drought had reached its 67th day. The park was empty of visitors due to safety concerns cited by management, but I knew the real reason. 3 more visitors had developed those strange handprint rashes, and one had gone temporarily blind after claiming to see a ranger whose eyes reflected light like an animal's. I was losing track of time, finding myself in places with no memory of how I got there. The other rangers were avoiding me, whispering when I walked by. Only Matthew still talked to me, performing small blessing rituals when no one was looking. It's getting stronger, he told me one day. Whatever it is, the drought feeds it. That night I woke from another blackout to find myself standing in front of a bathroom mirror in the visitor center, miles from my cabin. As I stared at my reflection, something impossible happened. My reflection smiled while my own face remained frozen in horror. Then it spoke, its mouth forming words while mine stayed closed. "We need to talk, Frank," it said in my voice. "It's time you learned who really came back from Korea." I couldn't move as my reflection continued to speak with my voice, but not my words. "You've noticed the changes, haven't you, Frank?" it asked. "The missing time, the things you find on your hands and clothes. That's me, getting comfortable in your skin." "Who are you?" I managed to ask, my voice barely a whisper. The reflection's face twisted into something that wasn't quite human anymore. Its eyes changed to a yellowish color with vertical pupils like cats. "The Diné call us Skinwalkers. Other tribes have different names. We've been here long before your people built their little houses in the cliffs." My reflection stepped forward, and impossibly, its hand reached out from the mirror, grabbing my wrist. Its touch was ice cold. "Look at what I can do," it said. The thing wearing my face began to change, first subtly, the eyes, the way the skin sat on the bones. Then, more dramatically, as its joints popped and cracked, bending in ways no human body should bend. It was still me, but wrong in every way, like looking at myself through a broken mirror. "I wore you in Korea," it said, its voice now a rasping whisper. "When that bullet grazed your skull, and you slipped away for those few minutes, just long enough for me to try you on. You were perfect, a man with a foot in two worlds who no longer believed in either one." It released my arm and I stumbled backward, hitting the wall. "I can be you better than you can," it continued. "I know everything you know, feel everything you feel. I've been practicing. To prove its point, it recited memories only I should have known. My first day of school, the taste of my mother's fried bread, the name of my first crush, the exact feeling of fear when bullets flew past my head in Korea." "What do you want?" I asked, fighting to keep my voice steady. "A partnership," it said, smiling with too many teeth. "I need a body. The drought has made me hungry. The old feeding grounds are dry. I can only hold these borrowed shapes for so long before they decay." It gestured to itself. To my face it was wearing like a mask. "During the new moon, you sleep. I walk. That's my offer. And in return, I give you power. Protection, the ability to see things others can't, to do things others can't. And if I say no," the Skinwalker laughed, and the sound made the hairs on my neck stand up, "then I take what I want anyway. But it hurts more, for both of us." It stepped closer, and in the flickering bathroom light, I saw its shadow on the wall behind it. The shadow didn't match the body. It was twisted, much taller, with antlers sprouting from its head and limbs that stretched too long and thin. "You're already mine, Frank. You just don't remember agreeing." Yet, it reached into my uniform pocket and pulled out a small notebook I didn't recognize. It flipped it open to show me pages filled with my handwriting, but I had no memory of writing any of it. The entries described things I'd done during my blackouts: wandering the park at night, following visitors, watching them sleep through their cabin windows, and worse things, descriptions of how it felt to feed on their fear, their confusion, their essence. The words made me sick. "That's you, Frank. Or us, I should say. We've been busy." Lightning flashed outside, illuminating the bathroom. In that instant, the creature's true form was revealed in the mirror. Something ancient and hungry, wearing pieces of animal and human like badly sewn clothes. "The storm is coming," it said, looking toward the window. "The drought's ending, and I need to be ready." "Ready for what?" I asked. "To feed, to grow stronger. There's power in rain after drought. In life returning to dryness, I need that power." It turned back to me, and its eyes glowed yellow in the dim light. "Think about my offer, Frank. I'll find you at the new moon, 3 days from now." Then it simply fell apart. Like a puppet with cut strings, it collapsed to the floor. But instead of a body, there was nothing but my empty uniform and a small pile of dirt mixed with what looked like animal fur. I ran from the bathroom, from the visitor center, all the way back to my cabin through the dark. The wind was picking up, bringing the smell of rain. I locked my door, pushed a chair against it, and sat on my bed, shaking. I didn't know what was real anymore. Was I losing my mind, or was the monster real? Had it really been living inside me, taking over my body when I wasn't aware? I opened my closet and found a camera I didn't remember buying. When I checked the film inside, my blood ran cold. There were dozens of photos of me, sleeping in my bed, taken from above. Photos from nights I was alone in my locked cabin. "This isn't happening," I whispered, but even as I said it, I knew it was. Outside, thunder rolled across the mesas as the storm grew closer, the first real storm in more than 2 months. In the flash of lightning, I saw a figure standing perfectly still outside my window, a coyote watching my cabin, its eyes reflecting the lightning. As the rain finally began to fall, I realized I needed help. Not from the park service or even the police. I needed someone who understood what I was facing. I needed to visit my grandfather. I drove through the night, the rain pounding on my truck as I headed toward the Navajo reservation. Lightning lit up the sky every few minutes, showing glimpses of the empty road ahead. I kept checking my mirror, half expecting to see myself sitting in the back seat, watching with those wrong yellow eyes. My grandfather lived in a traditional hogan at the edge of the reservation. Despite the late hour, a light was burning inside when I arrived. Somehow he'd known I was coming. "I've been waiting for you," he said when I knocked on his door, soaking wet from the rain. "The storm finally brought you home." Inside, the hogan was warm and smelled of cedar and sage. My grandfather looked older than I remembered, his face more lined, but his eyes were still sharp. "It found me," I said, my voice breaking. "The Skinwalker. It's been wearing me since Korea." My grandfather nodded slowly, not surprised. "I know." "You? Oh no." I stared at him in disbelief. "How could you know?" He gestured for me to sit across from him by the small fire in the center of the room. "Why do you think I gave you the medicine pouch before you left? Not to protect you from the Skinwalker, but to attract it." My hands began to shake. "You used me as bait." "As a trap," he corrected. "For generations, our family has hunted the Skinwalker. My father, his father before him. Now it's your turn." He reached for the pouch still hanging around my neck, opening it carefully. Inside were 4 small pinches of soil, one from each of the sacred mountains, he explained, and a small piece of black glass that I now recognized as obsidian. "The mirror stone traps evil," he said. "The soils from the sacred mountains bind it. The Skinwalker has been following our family for 6 generations, but we've never been able to destroy it completely. Each time, it escapes by hiding in shadows or taking a new form. So you sent me to war wearing this, knowing it would attract the Skinwalker to me." My grandfather's eyes were sad but determined. "It was already hunting you, grandson. You were born with the sight, though you tried to deny it. I could only prepare you for the inevitable." He explained how the drought had weakened the natural barriers that normally kept skinwalkers from certain sacred places, how the creature had been gathering strength, preparing for something bigger. "The rain that ends a great drought releases special power," he said. "The Skinwalker plans to use that power during the new moon. It will try to possess you completely, permanently." "How do I stop it?" I asked. "You must face it in a place of power, draw it out, learn its true name. Then use the obsidian to trap its essence." He spent the rest of the night teaching me the words to an ancient blessing way ceremony, the same one his father had taught him. The pronunciation had to be perfect, the gestures precise. A single mistake could be fatal. "The Skinwalker will try to trick you," he warned. "It will use your memories, your voice, your face. It will offer you things you desire. It will threaten what you love. You must stay focused on your true purpose." As dawn broke, the rain still falling steadily outside, my grandfather gave me 4 obsidian arrowheads. These were blessed by medicine men from 4 different tribes, he said. "If you can wound the Skinwalker with these, it will weaken it enough for the ceremony to work." I left my grandfather's hogan with a plan forming in my mind. The Skinwalker had said it would find me at the new moon, 2 days from now. But I wouldn't wait. I would set a trap of my own. On the drive back to Mesa Verde, I realized something that made my blood run cold. The monthly inspection from the regional office was scheduled for tomorrow, the day before the new moon. My superior officer, Captain Wilson, always conducted these inspections personally, and suddenly things clicked into place. Every time I'd reported strange occurrences in the park, Wilson had dismissed them. Every piece of evidence I'd gathered had disappeared after showing it to him. Every witness had been transferred to other parks. The Skinwalker hadn't been working alone. It had been wearing my superior officer during those monthly visits. That's how it had kept its activities hidden for so long. When I returned to the park, I sought out Sosie immediately. The rain had stopped, but the ground was wet and muddy, soaking my boots as I walked to his cabin. "I need your help," I told him, explaining everything my grandfather had shared with me. Sosie listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally. When I finished, he said, "I knew there was something wrong with Captain Wilson. His shadow moves wrong when he thinks no one is watching. Together we planned our trap. The ancient Kever near Cliff Palace would be the perfect location, a place of power where the Skinwalker would be both strongest and most vulnerable. I would need to use everything I'd learned in the military about strategy and ambush, combined with the traditional knowledge my grandfather had shared. One approach wouldn't be enough. I needed both to succeed." As we gathered the materials we'd need for the ceremony, Sosie said quietly, "You know this might not work, right? No one has ever destroyed a Skinwalker completely." "I know," I replied, "but I have to try, otherwise it will wear me forever." The question that kept me awake that night, as I waited for dawn and the arrival of Captain Wilson, was simple. How do you kill something that can change its shape at will? How do you destroy a creature that has survived for centuries by wearing other people's faces? Tomorrow I would find out. Captain Wilson arrived at exactly 9 a.m., driving his government-issued jeep through the newly muddy park roads. He looked the same as always, tall, stern-faced, with perfect posture from his military days. But now I saw what I'd missed before, how his eyes never quite blinked at the right times, how his movements were just a little too smooth. "Ranger Begay," he said, shaking my hand with fingers that felt too cold. "Shall we begin the inspection?" I led him through the normal routine, checking equipment, reviewing logs, touring facilities. All the while, I was leading him closer to the ancient Kever, where Sosie was waiting with the preparations for our trap. "I'd like to show you something we discovered after the rain," I said casually. Some of the water seeped into one of the sealed Kevers. It revealed markings we've never seen before. Wilson's eyes flashed with interest, too much interest. "Led the way," he said, his voice suddenly eager. The Kever was one of the oldest in the park, a round ceremonial chamber dug into the earth, accessed by a ladder. Sosie had prepared it according to my grandfather's instructions. Obsidian pieces placed at the 4 directions, sacred cornmeal in specific patterns across the floor, cedar smoke hanging in the air. Wilson paused at the entrance, suddenly suspicious. "What's all this?" he asked, his voice changing slightly. "Just some protective measures the archaeological team put in place?" I lied. "The markings are very fragile." After a moment's hesitation, he climbed down the ladder. I followed, my heart pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. Inside the Kever, the air felt different, heavy with something I couldn't name. As soon as Wilson's feet touched the floor, the cornmeal patterns began to glow faintly blue. Wilson hissed, his body tensing. "What have you done?" "I know what you are," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "I know you've been wearing Captain Wilson just like you've been wearing me." The thing wearing Wilson's face smiled, but the expression was all wrong, too wide, revealing teeth that seemed too sharp. "Clever boy," it said, and Wilson's voice had changed completely, becoming deeper, raspier, but not clever enough. In a movement too fast to see clearly, it leaped at me, hands outstretched like claws. I dodged, tumbling across the Kever floor, smearing some of the cornmeal patterns. The glowing dimmed. "Your grandfather taught you a few tricks," it snarled, "but I've been playing this game for centuries." To prove its point, it began to change. Wilson's features melted away like wax under a flame. The creature became a twisted mix of human and animal parts. Coyote legs, human torso, elongated arms with too many joints, and a face that kept shifting. Between Wilson, me, and something not human at all. I offered you partnership, it growled. Now I'll take what I want. It lunged again, but this time I was ready. I pulled one of the obsidian arrowheads from my pocket and slashed at its outstretched arm. The black stone cut deep and the creature howled in pain. Where the obsidian touched it, the skin smoked and bubbled. Its blood hit the Kever floor, burning through the packed earth like acid. The Skinwalker backed away, clutching its wounded arm. "You'll pay for that," it hissed. Then it did something I wasn't prepared for. It reached up to its own face and began to peel the skin off like removing a mask. Underneath was raw red flesh that quickly reshaped itself. It was making a new face, and with horror I recognized the features forming. It was the face of one of the missing tourists from weeks ago. "Remember this woman?" it asked in her voice. "She was so afraid when I found her. Her fear was delicious." I felt sick but forced myself to focus on the ceremony my grandfather had taught me. I began to speak the ancient words, my voice growing stronger with each phrase. The cornmeal patterns glowed brighter. The Skinwalker screamed in rage and pain. It tried to rush me again, but Sosi appeared at the ladder, throwing a handful of the sacred soil from my medicine pouch. Where the soil touched the creature, its false skin sizzled. I continued the ceremony, forcing the Skinwalker to reveal its true name. Each syllable I spoke correctly seemed to cause it physical pain. It writhed on the Kever floor, its form becoming less stable, shifting rapidly between human, animal, and something else entirely. Finally, I spoke its name, a word so old and strange I can't repeat it even now. The effect was immediate. The Skinwalker froze, temporarily bound by the power of its true name. With shaking hands, I took out the obsidian mirror from my medicine pouch and held it toward the creature. The black surface glimmered in the dim light of the Kever. "Return to your true form," I commanded using the words my grandfather had taught me. "Be trapped in the void between worlds." The Skinwalker let out a howl that didn't sound like anything from this world. Not human, not animal, but something ancient and terrible. Its body began to come apart, pieces of it being pulled toward the obsidian mirror like metal to a magnet. But it fought back with the last of its strength. It lunged forward, digging its claws into my shadow on the Kever floor. My body seized up in agony as I felt something being torn from me, not physical, but something deeper. "If I go, part of you goes with me," it snarled. I felt a piece of myself, my spirit, my essence, being pulled away. I couldn't stop it. As the Skinwalker's body dissolved into the obsidian mirror, my shadow rippled and tore. A small piece of it separated and merged with the vanishing creature. Then it was over. The Skinwalker was gone, trapped in the obsidian mirror, which now felt heavy and cold in my hand. Captain Wilson's empty uniform lay crumpled on the Kever floor. Sosi helped me up the ladder. My body felt wrong somehow, lighter but also unbalanced, as if I'd lost something I couldn't name. "Is it over?" he asked quietly. I looked down at my shadow in the afternoon sun. It looked normal, except sometimes at the edges it moved when I was standing still. "Almost," I answered. In the weeks that followed, park rangers found a cave system containing victims of the Skinwalker going back centuries, all preserved in the dry air, all missing their faces, all with the same symbol carved into their chests. A symbol that matched the badge of a Mesa Verde park ranger. The official report blamed a human smuggler who'd been using the park's ancient tunnels. My personal journal told the true story. My nightmares about Korea stopped. But something else took their place. A hunger for the outdoors, especially at dusk and dawn. My senses grew sharper. I could track anything through the park, even on the darkest nights. I became the best ranger Mesa Verde had ever seen, but there was a cost. Sometimes, especially near sunset at Petroglyph Point, visitors would report, seeing my shadow detach and move ahead of me, scouting the path, before returning to my feet. And during stressful situations, my fingernails would sometimes lengthen and sharpen, forcing me to wear gloves during monthly meetings. I established new protocols for the park. Rangers always work in pairs during new moons, and everyone wears a small piece of obsidian at all times. The obsidian mirror containing the Skinwalker stays locked in a cedar box, buried under the floor of my cabin. But sometimes, on the coldest nights when the moon is dark, I hear scratching from beneath the floorboards, and my shadow dances on the wall without me. Years later, when new rangers come to Mesa Verde, they all go through what they think is just an orientation ritual I designed. What they don't know is that I'm testing them, making sure they're fully human before they're assigned to night patrol, because the Skinwalker may be trapped, but it isn't gone. Part of it lives in my shadow, and part of me went with it into that mirror. I still touch the medicine pouch around my neck every morning, grateful for my grandfather's wisdom. He knew I would never fully destroy the Skinwalker. No one can. The best we can do is contain it, keep it trapped between worlds. And sometimes when I walk the ancient paths of Mesa Verde alone, I feel eyes watching me from every shadow, waiting, patient, hungry. They say the drought might return next summer. I'll be ready. My name is Evelyn Mercer. I've been a park ranger at Olympic National Forest for almost 12 years now. I love my job, being outside, helping people, protecting nature. But what happened last spring changed everything I thought I knew about. These woods. It started during what we call the perpetual rainy season, those months where it feels like the sun forgot all about Washington State. The rain had been coming down for weeks, nothing unusual about that. What was strange was this fog that showed up 6 days ago and wouldn't leave. I was on the lookout tower, scanning the northwest area with my binoculars when I first noticed it. Most fog burns off by midday or moves with the wind. This stuff didn't. It just sat there, hugging the ground in the valley, not moving even when strong winds came through. "That's weird," I said to Scout, my border collie. "He's been my partner out here for 7 years, smart as a whip and braver than most people I know." I marked the fog's location on my map and didn't think much more about it that day. But the next morning it was still there, and it seemed bigger somehow. Then the calls started coming in. "Ranger Station, this is Evelyn," I answered, balancing the phone while sorting through weather reports. "We've got hikers missing," said Jake. Another. "Ranger from the West Station. Group of college kids who were camping near Huckleberry Creek. They radioed in yesterday about some strange moving fog, then nothing." My stomach did a little flip. Moving fog? Did they describe it? Said it was moving against the wind, following the creek. Thought it was cool until their radio cut out. By the end of the day, we had 3 different groups reported missing, all from the same area, all mentioning that weird fog before disappearing. I spread the topographical maps across my desk that night, marking where each group was last heard from. The pattern was clear. The fog was sticking to creek beds and water sources. It wasn't acting like normal fog at all. "What do you think, buddy?" I asked Scout, who was curled up in his bed in the corner. He lifted his head, those intelligent eyes watching me, but he didn't get up like he usually would. The next morning I decided to check it out myself. I packed my gear, clipped Scout's leash on, and drove out to where the last group had disappeared. The rain was coming down in sheets as we approached Cedar Creek. I could see the fog from the road, thick and white, clinging to the water like it was alive. Scout started acting strange as soon as we got close. His tail went between his legs, and he pulled back on his leash. "Come on, boy, what's wrong?" I coaxed him, but he wouldn't budge. When we got to the creek's edge, he looked at his reflection in the water and started growling, something I'd never seen him do before. His hackles were raised, and he backed away, whining. I knelt down to check the water. It looked normal, but something felt off. I took out some sample containers and filled them with water from the creek and some of the condensation from the fog. Maybe the lab could tell me what was spooking him. My weather station was going crazy too. The humidity reader showed 100%, which made sense with all the fog, but the barometric pressure was dropping rapidly, something that doesn't happen in stable fog conditions. And every time the fog drifted near my equipment, the electronic readings would jump or die completely. Back at the station, I called Billy Two Rivers, an elder from the local Quileute tribe who often helped with search and rescue. "We can't help with this one, Evelyn," he said, his voice grave. "Our traditions forbid entering that area during the long tears." The long tears? The extended rainy season. Those waters are in breath-stealer territory now. Breath-stealer? "Billy, we have missing hikers. What aren't you telling me?" He was quiet for a long moment. "The old stories say there are things that live in the mist. Things that take more than just your body. They take your breath, your voice, your spirit. We don't go there, Evelyn, and you shouldn't either." I thanked him and hung up, feeling uneasy. I'm not superstitious, but Billy wasn't the type to scare easily. If something had him spooked. The next day, we assembled search teams to look for the missing hikers. As we got closer to the fog bank, our radios started acting up. Nothing but static. Then just as I was about to turn back to get replacement units, I heard something through the white noise. Breathing. And whispers. Like people having conversations just below the threshold of hearing. "Hello?" I called out. "Is anyone there?" The whispers stopped immediately. Just static again. When the lab results came back on my samples, they didn't make any sense. The moisture from the fog contained proteins that the technician said weren't found in nature, at least not in any database they had access to. And there were trace amounts of human DNA from multiple different people. "That's impossible," I said to the technician over the phone. "Are you sure the samples weren't contaminated?" "Positive," she replied. "And Evelyn, these readings aren't normal. Whatever this is, it's not just water vapor." That night, I noticed something strange about my boots. They had developed some kind of mold from walking through the fog-affected areas. But this wasn't ordinary mold. It was faintly glowing in the dark, and the patterns it formed looked disturbingly like tiny, screaming faces. I took some photos of the fog using specialized filters the next day, and what I saw chilled me to the bone. There were shapes in there, vaguely human shapes, with long, stretched limbs and smooth, featureless faces. They moved through the fog like they were swimming. More disturbing was what we found along the creek beds: hiking equipment, backpacks, even clothes, scattered as if dropped in a hurry. But the items looked wrong. Parts of them had dissolved, not like they'd been submerged in water, but as if they'd been dipped in weak acid, and the fog itself seemed to be avoiding things. When I laid down a line of iron nails and salt across one of the paths, the fog stopped right at the boundary, curling away like it was alive and conscious of what it was touching. I was starting to think that whatever this was, it wasn't a natural phenomenon at all. And if the missing hikers had wandered into it, I stayed up late that night, digging through old records. That's when I found it, a journal from the 1800s, written by one of the first settlers in the area. He described a fog, just like this one, a fog that consumed an entire logging camp, leaving nothing but tools behind. The same fog that was growing larger by the day outside my window. The same fog that now contained proteins, human DNA, and shapes that shouldn't exist. And I was running out of time to figure out what it was before it claimed more victims. Scout whined from his bed, sensing my fear. I walked over and patted his head. "It's okay, boy, we'll figure this out." But as I looked out the window at the thick white blanket creeping through the trees, I wasn't sure I believed my own words. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of rain tapping on my cabin roof. The search for the missing hikers was going into its 4th day, and I was starting to lose hope of finding them alive. I made coffee and looked at the maps again. The fog had spread even further overnight, now covering almost the entire northwest area of the forest. It was like it was growing, feeding on something. My phone rang. It was Tom from the search team. "Evelyn, we found something. You should come see this." 20 minutes later, I was standing at the edge of Blackwater Creek, staring at a line of footprints that led straight into the fog and didn't come out the other side. Next to the footprints were deep paw marks from search dogs. The dogs wouldn't go any further, Tom explained, pointing to where the tracks suddenly turned chaotic. They freaked out right here. See how their claws dug into the mud? They were terrified of something. I knelt down to look closer. The dogs had literally torn up the ground trying to get away from the fog, and these were trained search animals that had been through wildfires and blizzards without flinching. "Where are the dogs now?" I asked. "Back at base. They won't come near this area again. Johnson tried to bring his German Shepherd back this morning, and the poor thing nearly strangled itself trying to get away." I stood up and looked at the fog. It seemed thicker today, and I swore I could see movement inside it. "Did you check the satellite images like I asked?" Tom nodded and pulled out his tablet. "That's the other weird thing. Look at this." He showed me images from the weather service. The fog appeared clearly, but it wasn't moving like normal weather patterns. "According to this, the fog started right here," he said, pointing to a spot on the map. "There was a small earthquake last month. Remember? It exposed an underground lake that nobody knew was there. The fog started forming right after that. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the rain. So it's coming from underground. Looks that way." I spent the rest of the day setting up motion sensor cameras around the fog's edge. If something was moving in there, I wanted to know what it was. The next morning I checked the footage. What I saw made my blood run cold. At night, the fog didn't just sit there. It moved, and not with the wind. It moved against it, sending out long, finger-like tendrils that seemed to be searching for something. They crawled along the forest floor, probing under rocks, into hollow logs, like they were looking for something, or hunting. I was about to call my boss when something caught my eye. One of the old file cabinets in the corner of my office had a folder sticking out. Forest Service Records, 1930-1940. I pulled it out and started reading. There it was, a classified incident from 1937. A civilian Conservation Corps work crew of 12 men had been building trails in the exact area where our hikers had gone missing. 10 of them disappeared. The 2 survivors were found wandering on the road, soaking wet and babbling about the fog with faces. According to their statement, the fog had the faces of everyone it took. I shivered and kept reading. There was no follow-up, no explanation. Just a note saying the incident was classified by order of the regional director. I was still thinking about this when Dr. Patrick Norris arrived. He was a biologist from the university who specialized in unusual organisms. I'd called him yesterday, after seeing those shapes in the fog. "Thanks for coming, Pat," I said, shaking his hand. "When you described this fog, I couldn't stay away," he replied, his eyes bright with scientific curiosity. "You said you have samples." I showed him to the lab area in the back of the ranger station where I'd set up the samples from the fog. He spent hours testing them, occasionally making surprised noises or muttering to himself. Finally, he looked up, his face serious. "Evelyn, this isn't a normal weather phenomenon. I think we're dealing with a colonial organism." "A what?" "A collection of simple organisms that form a larger entity, like a slime mold or certain types of algae. But this," he shook his head, "this is magnitudes more complex. The proteins in this fog suggest it has a structure similar to neural tissue." "Are you saying the fog is alive and thinking?" "I'm saying it's a possibility we can't ignore." That afternoon, I found something even stranger. A small research station hidden deep in the woods, not marked on any of my maps. It looked abandoned for years, the door hanging off its hinges. Inside, I found notebooks filled with observations about the fog. Whoever had been studying it had come to the same conclusion as Dr. Norris, that the fog was alive and intelligent. The final entry simply read, "It knows we're watching. It's learning from us." The date on that entry was from 1968. When I got back to the main station, Dr. Norris was doing more tests. He had hooked up speakers and was playing different sounds to see if the fog samples reacted. "Nothing so far," he said. "Not to music, not to natural sounds. But watch this." He played a recording of someone crying for help. The fog sample in the petri dish immediately began to move, forming tentacle-like shapes that reached toward the sound. "It reacts to human distress," he said quietly, "like a predator responding to the sound of injured prey." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those missing hikers, about the fog that moved against the wind, about the faces that survivors had reported seeing. At dawn, I made a decision. I was going to find the source of the fog, that underground lake. Dr. Norris insisted on coming with me. We packed special equipment, night vision goggles, specialized filters, and containers for samples. I also brought iron nails and salt, remembering how the fog had avoided these materials. As we hiked closer to where the satellite images showed the fog originating, the forest got quieter. No birds, no insects, not even the sound of small animals moving through the underbrush. Just the constant drip of rain and our own breathing. The entrance to the cave system was hidden behind a waterfall. As we approached, Scout started whining. Again, he refused to go any closer. "You stay here, boy," I told him, tying his leash to a tree far from the cave entrance. "Guard our way back." The cave was dark and wet, the walls glistening with moisture. But it wasn't normal moisture. In the beam of our flashlights, the walls looked like they were covered in a thin layer of jelly-like substance, the same protein we'd found in the fog samples. "It's everywhere," Dr. Norris whispered, taking samples from the wall. "The cave is coated with it." We went deeper, following the sound of rushing water. The air got thicker, harder to breathe. And then we entered a large chamber and saw it, the underground lake. But this was no ordinary body of water. The surface of the lake pulsed gently, like it was breathing. And floating just beneath that surface were shapes, human shapes, bodies suspended in the gelatinous water, perfectly preserved. Their eyes were open, their faces frozen in expressions of pure terror. "Oh my God," I whispered. "The missing hikers." But it wasn't just our hikers. There were dozens of bodies floating there. Some looked recent, others wore clothes that hadn't been in style for decades. Dr. Norris stepped closer to the edge, his scientific curiosity overcoming his fear. He took out a device and held it over. "The nearest floating body. There's electrical activity," he said, his voice shaking. "Neural patterns. Evelyn, these people, I think they're still conscious." That's when the fog began to rise from the lake's surface. It swirled and thickened, forming into a shape right in front of us. A human shape with long, stretched limbs and a blank face that slowly formed features. Eyes, a nose, a mouth. A mouth that opened to speak. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The fog thing stood before us, its body half-formed like melting wax, but with a face that kept shifting between different human features. "Dr. Norris," I whispered. "We need to go, now." But he was frozen in place, staring at the creature with a mixture of fear and scientific wonder. "Fascinating," he breathed. "It's maintaining cohesion outside of its environment. The molecular structure must be—" "Pat!" I grabbed his arm. "We need to leave." The fog creature tilted its head, the movement unnaturally smooth. Then something even more terrifying happened. It spoke, not with one voice, but with many voices layered on top of each other. Men, women, even children's voices, all talking at once. Evelyn Mercer, it said. Park ranger, 37 years old, born in Seattle. Dog named Scout, cabin on the East Ridge. I felt sick. How did it know all that? What are you? Dr. Norris asked, his scientific curiosity still somehow stronger than his fear. The creature rippled, tendrils of fog flowing around it like clothes in a breeze. We are collectors, it said in that horrible chorus of voices. We collect experiences. We collect knowledge. We collect you. Its arm extended, stretching impossibly long, reaching for Dr. Norris. I yanked him back just in time. How do you know who I am? I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. The thing's face shifted again, settling into the features of a young man I'd seen in the photos of the missing hikers. His voice came through clearer than the others. You looked for us, it said, using just the hiker's voice now. But we were already here, part of it. It takes us and keeps us. The hikers, I gasped. They're conscious in there, they're aware. We all are, said the thing, its face morphing again, this time into an older man with a Forest Service patch just visible on the shoulder of his half-formed uniform. I was Ranger Thomas Dale, 1967. It took me while I was checking storm damage. I've been here ever since. We all have. Dr. Norris was furiously taking notes and readings. The consciousness survives, he muttered. It somehow preserves the neural patterns while dissolving the physical body. The thing rippled again, seeming pleased. Yes, it said, we understand now, thanks to you. Before humans, we took simpler creatures. Their experiences were limited. But you... Its face split into a terrible smile. You're so complex, so full of memory and emotion and knowledge. How long have you been here, I asked, trying to keep it talking while I edged toward the cave entrance. Always, it replied. Before your kind walked upright. Before your kind existed at all. We fed and we grew and we learned, and now we evolve. As it spoke, parts of the fog began to solidify, forming more distinct human features. Hands with fingers, a more stable face. It was like watching someone learn to use a new body. The missing people, I said. The hikers, the loggers from the 1800s, the CCC workers. You took them all. We keep them, it corrected. Their bodies feed us, their minds join us. They are not gone, they are here. It touched what was becoming its chest. Part of our whole. Dr. Norris stepped forward, his scientific excitement overcoming his caution. Do you communicate with them, the consciousness you've absorbed? They are us now, it said simply. We think together. We learn together. I didn't like how interested Dr. Norris was getting. Pat, I said quietly, we need to report this. We need to get help. Do you realize what this means? He whispered back, his eyes wide. This entity could revolutionize our understanding of consciousness itself. If it can preserve human neural patterns after physical death. Those people didn't volunteer, I cut him off. It hunted them, it's still hunting. The creature was watching our exchange with interest. Suddenly it stretched out a tendril of fog that wrapped around Dr. Norris's wrist, the one holding his recording device. Interesting tool, it said. We learn. Dr. Norris tried to pull away, but the fog held tight. Then, to my horror, I saw the sleeve of his jacket begin to dissolve where the fog touched it. Let him go, I shouted, pulling a flashlight from my belt and shining it directly at the tendril. The bright light seemed to disrupt its form. The fog sizzled and recoiled, releasing Dr. Norris. The light hurts it, I said, keeping the beam trained on the creature as it retreated slightly. Not hurt, it corrected, its many-voiced speech becoming garbled. We adjust. As we backed toward the cave entrance, the creature followed, keeping just at the edge of my flashlight's beam. More tendrils of fog were rising from the lake behind it, joining its form, making it larger. Why are you following the creeks and water sources? I asked, trying to understand its behavior. We need moisture, it explained. We feed through water, we travel through water. Your bodies are mostly water. Its face formed that terrible smile again. Perfect for us. We had almost reached the mouth of the cave when Dr. Norris stumbled on a rock and dropped his sample case. As he bent to pick it up, the creature struck. A thick tendril of fog shot out like a spear, engulfing his outstretched arm up to the elbow. Dr. Norris screamed, a sound I'll never forget as long as I live. I grabbed him with my free hand and pulled with all my strength, keeping the flashlight aimed at the fog creature with the other. The tendril thinned but didn't break, and then I saw what was happening to Dr. Norris's arm. It was dissolving, not all at once, but in layers. First, his jacket sleeve simply disappeared. Then his skin began to bubble and melt away, revealing the muscle beneath. Dr. Norris was screaming continuously now, trying desperately to pull away. "Take this," I shouted, forcing the flashlight into his good hand. "Keep it on that thing." While he held the light, I pulled a canister of salt from my pack and dumped it in a line between us and the creature. The fog tendrils that had reached the cave floor recoiled from the white line. With one final desperate pull, I yanked Dr. Norris free from the fog's grip. His arm was a horror, skin gone in patches, muscle visible beneath, blood flowing from dissolved areas, but he was alive. We stumbled out of the cave, Dr. Norris still somehow holding the flashlight on the creature which had followed us to the very edge of the cave mouth but wouldn't cross the salt line. "We need to get you to a hospital," I told him, trying to wrap his mangled arm with a first aid bandage from my pack. "No time," he gasped through gritted teeth. "Need to warn others. It's coming out, Evelyn. It's been trapped in that cave, in that lake, but now it's found a way out." As if confirming his words, we heard a strange sound from inside the cave, like thousands of whispers all at once. The fog was pouring out of the cave entrance now, flowing around our salt line, reaching for the nearest creek bed. "Scout!" I suddenly remembered my dog. We ran to where I'd tied him, relieved to find him still there, barking frantically at the approaching fog. We made it back to my truck just as the rain started again. Harder this time, sheets of water that would feed the fog creature and help it spread. As I drove us back toward the ranger station, I looked in my rearview mirror and felt my blood freeze. The fog was following us, flowing along the roadside ditches filled with rainwater, moving much, faster than fog should be able to move. "It's coming," Dr. Norris said weakly from the passenger seat, his face pale from blood loss. "And I don't think we can stop it." My radio crackled to life. "Ranger Mercer? Come in, Ranger Mercer." It was Jake from the West Station. "I'm here." "Jake," I answered. "I've got Dr. Norris with me. He's injured and needs medical attention, and we've got a serious situation with that fog." "That's why I'm calling," Jake said, his voice tense. "The fog's everywhere now, Evelyn. It's surrounding the West Station, and there's something wrong with it. It's like it's alive." "Listen carefully," I said. "That fog is dangerous. It's some kind of organism and it will attack people. Get everyone inside. Use bright lights to keep it back. And put salt or iron at every entrance, doors, windows, any cracks. It can't cross those." "Salt? Iron? Evelyn, what are you—" "Just do it, Jake. And radio the other stations. Tell everyone to stay away from the fog and the water. It travels through water." As we drove, Dr. Norris was examining his injured arm with clinical detachment despite the pain he must have been in. "Look at this," he said, pointing to where the fog had touched him. "It's not just dissolving tissue, it's absorbing it, taking the organic material and breaking it down. Like digestion," I said grimly. "Exactly." He looked up at me, his scientist's mind still working despite everything. "But it keeps the neural tissue intact somehow. That's why those bodies in the lake still had brain activity. It's feeding on our bodies, but preserving our minds." "But why? What does it want with our consciousness?" Dr. Norris was quiet for a moment. "It said it was evolving. he finally answered. I think it's using human minds to become more intelligent, to learn and grow. It's not just feeding on us physically, it's feeding on our knowledge, our experiences, our very selves. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. We need to stop it. How do you stop something that's been here since before humans existed? Something that can turn into fog, that can think, that can absorb and use human minds? He shook his head. I'm not sure we can. As we pulled up to the main ranger station, I saw with horror that the fog had somehow beaten us there. It was surrounding the building, thick white clouds pressing against the windows, seeking a way in. And standing at one of those windows, looking out at us with an expression of pure terror, was my boss, Ranger Wilson. The radio crackled again. Wilson's voice came through, shaking with fear. Evelyn, we're trapped in here. This fog, there are faces in it. Voices. It knows our names, Evelyn. It's calling us by name. Stay in the truck, I told Dr. Norris, grabbing my emergency pack. What are you going to do? He asked, clutching his wounded arm. I don't know yet, but there are people trapped in there. I looked at Scout, who was pressed against the back window as far from the fog as he could get. Stay, boy. Guard Dr. Norris. I stepped out into the rain, immediately feeling the thick, wet air on my skin. The fog swirled around the ranger station, almost like it was testing the building for ways to get in. My radio crackled. Evelyn, it was Wilson again. There are 5 of us in here. The fog is coming in through the air vents. We've blocked most of them, but static cut him off. I needed to get inside. Looking around, I spotted the maintenance shed about 50 yards away. If I could reach it, there were tools there, chemicals, things I might be able to use. Taking a deep breath, I made a run for it. The fog immediately reacted, sending tendrils snaking across the ground toward me. I dodged them, splashing through puddles, my boots sending up sprays of water with each step. I reached the shed and yanked the door open, slamming it shut behind me. The small window showed the fog gathering outside, pressing against the glass. Like a curious animal, working quickly, I grabbed what I needed: road flares, salt bags from our winter supply, iron tools, and several containers of chemicals used for water testing and treatment. Dr. Norris had said the fog entity depended on certain pH levels. Maybe I could use that. I mixed chemicals in a spray bottle, creating a strong, acidic solution. Then I tied a bandana over my face, tucked the flares into my belt, and prepared to make a dash for the main building. But when I looked out the window again, my blood ran cold. The fog wasn't just pressing against the glass anymore. It had formed a face I recognized with painful clarity. "Mom," I whispered, unable to help myself. The fog had taken the shape of my mother's face, who had died 3 years ago. It smiled at me with her smile, pressed her hand against the glass like she used to do when saying goodbye. "Evelyn," it said in her voice, "let me in, sweetheart. I miss you." Something inside me broke. I knew it wasn't really her. I knew it was the creature trying to trick me. But seeing her face, hearing her voice, no. I shook my head hard, forcing myself to focus. This was exactly how it hunted, finding our weaknesses, using them against us. "You're not my mother," I said firmly. The face changed, becoming angry, distorted. The glass began to crack under the pressure of the fog pressing against it. I didn't wait for it to break. I threw the door open and ran, heading straight for the main building. Behind me, I heard the window shatter as the fog poured into the shed. The front door of the ranger station was only 20 yards away now. I could see Wilson's face at the window, his eyes wide with fear. 10 yards to go. 5. I could feel the fog right behind me, cold tendrils brushing my neck. Wilson opened the door just enough for me to dive through, then slammed it shut. The rangers were there with salt bags, quickly pouring a line across the doorway. "Are you okay?" Wilson asked, helping me to my feet. I nodded, trying to catch my breath. The fog, it can make itself look like people you know, people you care about. "We noticed," said Karen, another ranger, her voice shaking. "It looked like my little boy out there, called me mommy and everything." I looked around the room. The 5 staff members had done a good job blocking most entrances. Salt lines at every door and window. Bright lights set up everywhere, but the fog was still getting in, thin wisps seeping through cracks in the old building, gathering in corners. "Where's Dr. Norris?" Wilson asked. "In my truck. He's hurt." The fog, it started to dissolve his arm. Everyone looked horrified. I quickly explained what we'd learned about the creature, how it consumed bodies but kept the minds, how it was intelligent and evolving, how it used water to move and feed. "So, what do we do?" asked Karen. "How do we fight this thing?" Before I could answer, the lights flickered and went out. The backup generator kicked in after a few seconds, but those moments of darkness were terrifying. We could all hear whispers in the dark, dozens of voices calling our names. "It's playing. With the electrical system," I said. "Dr. Norris found out it can interfere with electronic equipment." The radio on the dispatch desk suddenly came to life, broadcasting a distress call. "Mayday, Mayday. This is Search Team Bravo. We're surrounded by some kind of fog. It's coming closer. We need immediate evac." The transmission cut off abruptly. Wilson reached for the radio to respond, but I stopped him. "Don't," I warned. "It's not real. The fog is mimicking emergency calls to lure more people into its trap." As if confirming my words, the radio broadcast another voice, this one eerily familiar. "Hello? Can anyone hear me? This is Dr. Patrick Norris. I'm still in the truck, but the fog is getting in. Please, someone help me." I knew it was fake. I'd left Dr. Norris safely in my truck with Scout, and the windows were rolled up tight. The fog was trying to trick us into opening the doors, but then I heard barking, Scout's distinctive bark, followed by a human scream. "Oh God," I whispered. "What if it really is getting into the truck?" "It's a trick," Wilson insisted, holding my arm. "It wants us to go out there." I knew he was right, but the thought of Dr. Norris and Scout being taken by that thing, I couldn't bear it. The windows were now completely covered by fog, thick white clouds pressing against the glass. And in that fog, faces were forming, faces of the missing hikers, of old rangers long gone, of people I didn't recognize but who must have been victims from years past. "Help us," they whispered, their voices somehow coming through the glass. "Join us. It doesn't hurt. We're all together here." One of the younger rangers, Tim, was staring at one of the faces. "Dad?" he whispered, taking a step toward the window. "Tim, no," I grabbed him. "It's not your dad. It's the fog trying to trick you." He shook his head as if coming out of a trance. It looked just like him, sounded like him too. The fog was pressing harder now, the windows starting to crack under the pressure. "We need a plan," Wilson said. "We can't stay here forever, and that thing isn't going away." I nodded, thinking fast. Dr. Norris said the fog depends on specific pH levels. I made an acid solution that might disrupt its molecular structure temporarily. But to really hurt it, we need to target its source, that underground lake. "How do we do that?" Karen asked. "The water treatment plant has chemicals. We could use acid compounds that would change the pH of the entire water system. If we could introduce enough of those chemicals into the underground water supply, we might kill it," Wilson finished, "or at least weaken it enough to contain it. But we'd need to get to the treatment plant," I said, "and it's over a mile." "Away! We've got the emergency vehicle," Tim suggested, pointing to our all-terrain rescue truck parked in the garage. "It's sealed better than regular vehicles." It was a desperate plan, but it was all we had. We quickly gathered the supplies we'd need: lights, salt, iron tools as weapons, and my chemical spray as a defense. Before we could move, though, I needed to check on Dr. Norris and Scout. I went to the window facing the parking lot and peered out. My truck was still there, but I couldn't see inside. The windows were covered with fog. "No," I whispered. Then I saw something that made my heart sink. The driver's side door was open. Either Dr. Norris had tried to run for the building, or the fog around my truck suddenly swirled and formed into a human shape. It was Dr. Norris, but not as I'd left him. This version of him was whole and uninjured, smiling calmly. "Evelyn," he called, his voice somehow carrying clearly. "I figured it out. The fog, it's not what we thought. It's not dangerous. It's beautiful. It's the next step in evolution." I knew it wasn't really him. The real Dr. Norris would never say that. The entity had taken him, and now it was using his form to try to lure me out. "Where's Scout?" I called back, my voice breaking. The Fog Norris smiled wider. "He's here too. We're all here, and we want you to join us." As he spoke, the fog around him formed another shape. Scout, wagging his tail, looking exactly like my beloved dog. I felt tears running down my face, but forced myself to turn away. "We need to go," I told the others. "Now." We piled into the emergency vehicle, making sure all windows and vents were sealed. Wilson took the driver's seat, and I sat, up front with my spray bottle ready. "Floor it," I told him. "Don't stop for anything." He hit the gas, and we burst out of the garage into the fog-covered world. Immediately, the fog converged on our vehicle, pressing against the windows, forming faces that begged and pleaded with us to stop. One face appeared right in front of me, a perfect copy of Dr. Norris, mouthing something I couldn't hear over the engine. Then his expression changed to one of pain and horror. His mouth opened in a silent scream, and I watched as his face seemed to melt away, revealing another face beneath, and another, all victims of the fog, all trapped in conscious torment. "Don't look," I told the others. "Just keep going." The road to the water treatment plant was normally a 15-minute drive. We made it in 8, swerving around fog formations that grew denser and more solid as we went. The fog was learning, adapting, trying to form barriers to stop us. When we finally reached the plant, the fog was right behind us, flowing across the parking lot like a living tide. "Everyone stay close," I ordered as we left the vehicle, each of us carrying flashlights and salt bags. "Head straight for the main treatment room." We ran for the entrance, the fog nipping at our heels. Karen stumbled, and a tendril of fog wrapped around her ankle. She screamed as her boot began to dissolve. Tim grabbed her arm and pulled while I sprayed the tendril with my acid solution. It recoiled with a hissing sound, releasing Karen. We made it inside and quickly laid down salt lines at every entrance. The main treatment room was filled with chemicals used to purify the town's water supply. Among them were large tanks of acid compounds used to adjust pH levels. "We need to dump as much of this as we can into the water system," I explained. "It won't just flow to homes, it'll also seep into the groundwater and eventually reach that underground lake." We worked quickly, redirecting the flow of chemicals, overriding safety protocols to increase the dosage to maximum levels. Outside, the fog was gathering, pressing against every window and door. And now it was trying a new tactic. The building's fire sprinklers suddenly activated, sending water raining down on us. "It's trying to wash away our salt lines," Wilson shouted over the noise of the sprinklers. He was right. The water was dissolving. Our protective barriers and tendrils of fog were already creeping under doors and through vents. "Keep working," I yelled to the others. "We're almost done." I frantically finished the chemical feed programming while Wilson and Tim tried to shut off the sprinklers. Karen was using a broom to push back the fog tendrils that were getting through. Finally, the system was set. "It's done," I shouted. "The chemicals are feeding into the system. Now we just need to—" I never finished that sentence. The lights went out completely, plunging us into darkness. The backup generators failed to kick in. In the darkness, the fog moved in. I could feel it brushing against my skin, cold and wet and somehow hungry. "Everyone, lights!" I called, turning on my flashlight. The beams cut through the darkness, revealing fog filling the room, taking shapes, human shapes that walked toward us with outstretched hands. "Get back to the vehicle," I ordered. We ran, our flashlight beams cutting paths through the fog creatures. But when we reached the door, we found our way blocked by the most terrifying sight yet. Standing there, formed completely from fog but looking almost solid, was a perfect copy of me. It smiled with my face, spoke with my voice. "Why are you running?" "From yourself, Evelyn?" it asked. "Don't you want to be whole? Don't you want to join everyone you've lost?" The fog around it shifted, forming into shapes I recognized. My mother, my father, and most painfully, a small girl with pigtails. My daughter Emma, who had died 5 years ago in an accident I still blame myself for. "Mommy," said the fog Emma, reaching out her hand. "I miss you. Please come with me." I felt my resolve weakening. Part of me wanted to go to her, to hold her again, even if I knew it wasn't really her. "Evelyn!" Wilson's voice cut through my thoughts. "It's not real!" The fog Emma's face suddenly distorted, turning angry. "You let me die!" It shrieked in a voice that was no longer childlike. "Now you'll join me!" The shock of hearing those words my real daughter would never say, broke the spell. I raised my spray bottle and emptied it directly into the fog creature's face. It recoiled with an inhuman scream, its form dissolving where the acid hit it. We pushed through the gap and ran for the vehicle. As we drove away, I looked back at the treatment plant. The fog was already retreating, flowing away from the building, away from the water system, now pumping acidified chemicals into the ground. "Did it work?" Tim asked, his voice shaking. "I don't know," I admitted, "but we've hurt it, maybe enough to slow it down until help comes." We drove back to the ranger station in silence, each lost in our own thoughts. The fog seemed thinner now, less aggressive but still present. When we arrived, we found the station empty. No sign of Dr. Norris, no sign of Scout, just empty rooms with salt lines still intact at the windows and doors. I went to the radio room and sent out an emergency broadcast, explaining everything we knew about the fog entity and requesting immediate government assistance. To my surprise, the response was immediate. Message received, Ranger Mercer, containment team en route. Estimated arrival 90 minutes. Maintain position and avoid all contact with the anomaly. They knew. Somehow, they already knew what we were dealing with. Within 2 hours, the first helicopters appeared overhead. Not Forest Service or local police, but unmarked black choppers that landed in the parking lot, disgorging teams of people in hazmat suits carrying equipment I'd never seen before. Their leader approached me, face hidden behind a mask. "Ranger, Mercer, I'm Dr. Chambers. We'll take it from here." "What about the missing people?" I demanded. "What about Dr. Norris, my dog?" Dr. Chambers hesitated. "I'm sorry," she said finally, "but if they were taken by the entity, they're already gone. But their minds are still in there," I insisted. "They're conscious. We can't just leave them." "We're not leaving them," she assured me. "We're containing the entity. It's all we can do." Over the next few days, I watched as they worked. They set up barriers around the cave system and the affected waterways. They poured chemicals into the underground lake, chemicals much stronger than what we had used. They established a perimeter that nobody was allowed to cross. The fog retreated, growing thinner, less active. But it didn't disappear completely, and then one morning Dr. Chambers came to see me. "Ranger Mercer, we need to talk about your future." "Your future," I repeated, looking at Dr. Chambers. She nodded, removing her mask for the first time. She had a kind face, but her eyes were serious. "What happened here has been classified at the highest level. No one can know about it. People are missing." I argued. "Families need answers. They'll be told there was a toxic chemical spill, a tragic accident." She handed me a folder. "Inside is your transfer paperwork. You're being reassigned to Arches National Park in Utah." "Utah?" I stared at her. "You're sending me to the desert. It's for your own protection, Ranger Mercer, and to ensure your silence." I understood the threat behind her words. Talk about what happened, and there would be consequences. "What about Wilson and the others?" I asked. all relocated to different parks across the country. None of you will be stationed together again. I thought about arguing, about fighting this, but I was tired, so tired. And part of me just wanted to be as far away from Olympic Forest as possible. When do I leave? I asked quietly. Tomorrow. Pack only what you need, everything else will be shipped later. That night, I stood on the porch of my cabin for the last time, looking out at the forest I'd loved for so many years. The fog was gone from this area, but in the distance, I could see the glow of powerful lights where the containment team was still working. I thought about Dr. Norris, about Scout, about all the others taken by the fog. Were they still conscious somewhere in that thing? Still aware as their minds were used by that creature to evolve? The next morning, a government car arrived to take me to the airport. As we drove away, I looked back at Olympic Forest one last time. The trees seemed darker somehow, more threatening than beautiful. That was 3 years ago. I like my new job at Arches. It's dry and hot, and there's never any fog. The tourists come and go, taking pictures of the stunning rock formations, never knowing that their cheerful ranger once faced something beyond human understanding. I've tried to move on, to forget. But some nights, I still wake up hearing those whispers, those voices calling my name. Last month, I received a plain brown envelope in the mail, no return address. Inside was a newspaper clipping about Olympic National Forest. Apparently, new hikers had gone missing. The official story blamed treacherous terrain and bad weather. But there was a handwritten note with the clipping. It's growing again. I recognized Wilson's handwriting. Sometimes when it rains, which isn't often here in Utah, I find myself watching the water puddle on the ground, half expecting it to move against gravity, to form shapes, to whisper my name. I've thought about going back, about trying to warn people, but what would I say? Who would believe me? And the truth is, I'm afraid, not just of the government agents who would surely stop me. I'm afraid of the fog itself, afraid that if I get too close again, I'll see Emma's face in it, hear her voice, and this time I might not be strong enough to turn away. So I stay here in the desert, where the air is dry and clean, where fog is just a distant memory. But sometimes, when tourists ask me where I worked before coming to Arches, I feel compelled to say something, to give them some kind of warning. If you ever visit Olympic National Forest, I tell them, stay away from the fog. And if you hear voices calling your name from the mist, run. They laugh, thinking I'm joking. A park ranger with a flair for spooky stories. If only they knew. Last week, I got a call from a blocked number. I answered and heard nothing but static at first. Then, barely audible beneath the noise, a familiar bark, Scout's bark, followed by Dr. Norris's voice. It's learning, Evelyn, it's growing, and it remembers you. I hung up and threw my phone across the room. That night, for the first time since moving to Utah, I saw fog rolling across the desert outside my window. Impossible fog, defying the dry air and heat, and in that fog, shapes moved. Familiar shapes. Closed my curtains, surrounded my house with salt lines, and sat up all night with the lights blazing. In the morning, the fog was gone. Just a nightmare, I told myself, just my imagination. But yesterday I found something outside my door, a small puddle of water that hadn't evaporated in the desert heat, and growing on that puddle, tiny patches of glowing mold in patterns that looked like screaming faces. I requested another transfer today, somewhere even drier, even more remote. But deep down, I know the truth. You can't run from the nightmare fog, because it's not just in Olympic Forest anymore. It's evolving, it's spreading, and it remembers everyone it meets. My name is Catherine Wolcott, but everyone calls me Cat. I've been a forest ranger at Superior National Forest in Minnesota for almost 8 years now. I love my job, The quiet of the trees, the fresh air, and the feeling that I'm making a difference by protecting this beautiful place. Tonight, though, I wish I was anywhere else. It started like any other summer evening. The sun was going down, painting the sky with orange and pink colors. I was locking up the visitor center thinking about the hot shower waiting for me at home. My German Shepherd, Rex, was sitting by my side like always. He's not just my pet, he's my service dog, trained to help me after I hurt my leg in a climbing accident years ago. Rex is always excited for our evening walks around the grounds, but tonight something was different. "Come on, boy. Time to go," I said, jingling his leash. Rex didn't move. He stared at the door leading outside and made this sound I'd never heard before. Not a bark or a growl, but a high-pitched whine that raised the hair on my arms. "What's wrong, buddy?" I knelt beside him, running my hand through his thick fur. His whole body was shaking. That's when my radio crackled. "Cat, you still there?" It was Mike from the South Station. "We've got reports of wolf attacks down here. 3 hikers said they were chased to their car. One of them got bit." My stomach tightened. Wolf attacks are super rare. Wolves usually avoid people. "Any rangers hurt?" I asked. "No, but people are scared. These wolves sound different, acting bold, coming close to the camping areas." I was about to respond when headlights flashed across the parking lot. A white truck pulled up, and I recognized it right away. Dr. James Harmon, the wildlife biologist who'd been studying our wolf population for the past year. He jumped out, carrying what looked like plaster casts. "Ranger Wolcott," he called, hurrying toward me. "You need to see this." I gave Rex's leash another tug, but he planted his butt firmly on the ground, refusing to move. I'd never seen him act this way. "I'll be right back," I told him, and propped open the door so I could talk to Dr. Harmon outside while keeping an eye on Rex. Dr. Harmon was tall and thin, with glasses that kept sliding down his nose. His hands shook as he held out the plaster casts to me. "Look at these tracks," he said, his voice tight with excitement or fear. I couldn't tell which. "I found them by Elder Creek." I took the first cast. It showed a perfect wolf print. 4 toe pads, claw marks, the works, but the second cast made my breath catch. It started as a wolf print on one end, but transformed halfway through into what was clearly a human footprint. "This has to be a mistake," I said. "Maybe 2 different tracks overlapped." He shook his head hard. "No, it's one continuous track. I watched this wolf cat. It was walking, then it just rose up, started walking on 2 legs. I couldn't believe my eyes. I thought he must be pulling my leg, but Dr. Harmon wasn't the joking type. Plus, his face was dead serious, his eyes wide behind his glasses. "Let's look at these inside," I said, glancing at the darkening sky. Under the bright fluorescent lights of the visitor center, the casts looked even stranger. That's when I noticed something odd. A faint greenish powder in the deepest parts of the prints. When I ran my finger over it, the powder seemed to glow slightly, pulsing in a weird rhythm. "What is this stuff?" I asked, showing him my finger. "I don't know," Dr. Harmon admitted, "but it was all over the area where I found the tracks. And look at this." He pulled out his phone and showed me a video of wolf tracks in mud. The weird thing was how they were arranged. Not random like normal animal tracks, but in perfect straight lines, like the wolves were marching in formation. Rex was still acting strange, pacing by the door and whining. Through the windows, I could see the full moon rising, looking bigger and redder than usual because of smoke from the wildfires burning beyond the ridge. The forest looked eerie in that blood-red light. My radio suddenly blasted to life, making me jump. "Ranger Station 1, this is Outpost 7. We've got multiple wolves surrounding the..." The voice belonged to Tim, a new ranger who'd only been with us for a month. Then came a sound that froze my blood, howling but not regular wolf howls. These sounded wrong somehow, too deep, too coordinated. And then human screams. "Tim! Tim! Come in!" I shouted into the radio, but all I got back was static. My hands were shaking as I went to the gun safe and took out my rifle. Standard procedure when there might be dangerous, wildlife-threatening people, but then I hesitated, looking at the small wooden box my grandfather had given me years ago. "You're going to think I'm crazy," he told me, "but someday you might need these." Inside were 5 bullets, hand-cast in silver. I'd always thought it was just my grandfather being superstitious. He'd grown up on stories of the supernatural. I'd never taken those bullets on patrol, always thinking how silly they seemed. Tonight, though, something made me grab them and slip them into my pocket, just in case. "We need to get to Outpost 7, I told Dr. Harmon. "Something's wrong," he nodded, his face pale. "I'll drive." Rex finally seemed willing to move, though he stuck to my side like glue as we headed to Dr. Harmon's truck. The night air felt heavy and strange, and the red moonlight cast everything in a bloody glow. As we drove along Tower Road, Dr. Harmon shared his notes with me. "The wolf packs have been acting strangely for weeks," he said. "Moving in formations I've never seen before, hunting strategies that are way too smart for normal wolves. It's like they're being directed somehow." "By what?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. "I don't know, but whatever it is, it's getting stronger as we get closer to the full moon." We were exactly halfway between the ranger station and Outpost 7 when the truck made a horrible grinding noise. The engine sputtered and died, and we rolled to a stop. In the middle of the dark road, Dr. Harmon tried to restart it, but nothing happened. When he popped the hood and shined his flashlight inside, we both gasped. The engine looked like something had torn through it from the inside, metal parts shredded, like paper. "That's impossible," he whispered. "I just had this serviced last week." I was about to suggest we radio for help when Rex suddenly lunged forward, breaking his leash with a sharp snap. Before I could grab him, he bolted into the dark forest, barking frantically. "Rex!" I screamed, running after him. But he disappeared into the trees, his barking turning to frightened yelps, then silence. Complete, terrible silence. Dr. Harmon and I stood frozen on the road, surrounded by dark forest on both sides, the blood-red moon watching us from above. We were alone, our truck destroyed, my dog gone, and somewhere out there something was waiting, and somehow I knew our night of horror was just beginning. Dr. Harmon and I stood in the middle of Tower Road, listening to the silence that followed. Rex's disappearance. The red moonlight made the trees look like they were covered in blood. "We need to find him," I whispered, my heart pounding. I pulled out my night vision binoculars from my pack and scanned the forest's edge. What I saw made my mouth go dry. Wolves. At least 12 of them, but they weren't moving like normal wolves. They were walking in perfect lines, making shapes like squares and triangles around us. They would stop, turn their heads all at the same time, then move again. It was like watching soldiers marching, not wild animals. "James," I said quietly, using Dr. Harmon's first name without thinking. "Look at this." I handed him the binoculars. His breath caught as he watched. "They're communicating," he whispered. "See how they flick their ears and tails. They're signaling to each other." He reached into his backpack and pulled out a small device with a screen. "This is a thermal scanner," he explained. "It shows heat signatures." We both stared at the screen as he slowly turned in a circle. The wolves showed up as bright spots in the forest. But then something else appeared on the screen, something big, standing on 2 legs. "What is that?" I asked, my voice shaking a little. "I don't know," Dr. Harmon said. "But it's about 7 feet tall, standing upright, and its body temperature is way too hot for a normal animal. It's exactly 100 yards away, watching us." I took my rifle off my shoulder, making sure it was loaded. My fingers touched the silver. Bullets in my pocket, and I wondered if I was crazy for even considering using them. Then something happened that I'll never forget. The forest, which is always full of sounds, crickets chirping, owls hooting, leaves rustling, went completely silent. It happened so fast that my ears popped, like when you drive up a mountain. That's not possible, Dr. Harmon whispered. Nature doesn't just turn off like a switch. A twig snapped in the darkness ahead of us. I raised my flashlight, my hand shaking. Rex walked out of the bushes. "Rex!" I called, relief flooding through me. But as he got closer, something felt wrong. His walk was stiff, like his legs weren't bending right, and his eyes, they were glowing yellow in my flashlight beam, not the warm brown I knew so well. "Something's wrong with him," Dr. Harmon said, backing away slowly. Rex started walking around us in a circle, growling in a weird pattern. Short growl, long growl, short again. Dr. Harmon's face went pale. "That's Morse code," he said. "He's spelling something, RUNNOW, run now." Before I could process what that meant, a howl broke the silence. It started like a normal wolf howl, but then it changed into something that made my skin crawl. It sounded like words being spoken backward, deep and wrong. "That came from the ridge," I said, pointing my flashlight that way, but seeing nothing, Dr. Harmon grabbed my arm. "Look," he said, pointing down. There were small puddles on the road from the rain earlier that day. In each puddle, I could see the reflection of wolves moving closer, but when I looked up, there were no wolves there. "That's not possible," I said again, but the words felt empty. Nothing about this night made sense anymore. Dr. Harmon checked his watch. "It's midnight," he said, but as he spoke, the second hand on his watch stopped moving. Then the howling started. Again, but this time from all directions at once. The wolves were calling to each other, but the sound was wrong. It had layers to it, like multiple voices singing together in perfect harmony. No wolf pack should be able to make sounds like that. Rex suddenly growled and lunged at Dr. Harmon, grabbing his arm in his teeth. I screamed and pulled Rex away, but not before he'd torn through Dr. Harmon's jacket and shirt into his skin. "He bit me!" Dr. Harmon gasped, holding his bleeding arm. "Something's wrong with your dog, Cat." I held Rex by his collar, but he kept trying to get away, snarling at Dr. Harmon. Where the dog's saliva touched the wound, the skin seemed to bubble and smoke. "It burns," Dr. Harmon said, his voice tight with pain. "Like acid." I tore a strip from my shirt and wrapped it around his arm. "We need to get to safety," I said. "Can you walk?" He nodded, but his face was already sweaty and pale. I looked through my rifle scope, scanning the forest slowly. Between the trees, I saw movement. Wolves. But something was wrong with them. Their legs looked too long, their bodies stretched out, and sometimes they would rise up on their back legs, stand for a moment, then drop back to all fours. "We can't." "Stay here," I said. "There's an old fire lookout tower about half a mile east. We can barricade ourselves there until morning." Dr. Harmon nodded, still holding his arm. Rex had calmed down a bit, but he wouldn't look at me, and he kept making that strange whining sound. We started walking east, staying on the road. Every few steps, I would turn and scan behind us, the rifle ready. The wolves kept pace with us, in the forest, never coming closer, but never falling behind either. "They're herding us," Dr. Harmon said quietly, "like sheep." "To where?" I asked. He didn't answer, but I could see in his eyes that he was thinking the same thing I was. Whatever was waiting for us at the end of this road, it wasn't going to be good. The fire lookout tower appeared ahead, a tall structure rising above the trees. It was old but still solid, with a small room at the top where fire spotters would watch the forest during dry seasons. "We can see in all directions from up there," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. As we got closer, Rex started acting strange again, pulling away from me and growling at the tower. "He doesn't want us to go there," Dr. Harmon said. "We don't have a choice," I replied. The wolves were closing in, their yellow eyes reflecting my flashlight in the darkness. We ran the last 100 feet to the tower and climbed the metal stairs, Rex reluctantly following. At the top, I slammed the door shut and slid the heavy metal bolt into place. The circular room had windows on all sides, giving us a perfect view of the forest around us. The blood-red moon hung directly overhead, casting its eerie light over everything. Dr. Harmon collapsed into a chair, his face even paler now. When he rolled up his sleeve, I gasped. Black lines were spreading from the bite wound, running up toward his shoulder like dark veins. "That's not a normal infection," I said, fear making my voice shake. "It's spreading too fast." He touched his mouth, wincing. "My teeth hurt," he said. Then he opened his mouth, and I saw that his canine teeth, the pointed ones, looked longer than they should be. I went to the windows and looked out. The wolves had emerged from the trees and were circling the tower. They moved in perfect rings, each ring going in the opposite direction from the ones next to it. It was like watching a complicated dance, and then I saw it, the thing that had shown up on the thermal scanner. It stepped out from the trees at the edge of the clearing, and my blood turned to ice. It was shaped like a man, but much bigger, at least 7 feet tall. Its body was covered in patchy fur, with muscles bulging underneath. Its legs were bent backward like a wolf's hind legs, ending in paws instead of feet. But the worst part was its face, a wolf's snout and jaw, with long, sharp teeth gleaming in the moonlight, but eyes that looked human, intelligent and aware. It stood upright, staring directly at the tower, directly at me. "Cat!" Dr. Harmon called weakly from behind me. "Something's happening to me." I turned to look at him and saw that he was sweating heavily now, his body shaking with what looked like fever. "I need you to tie me up," he said, his voice changing, getting deeper and rougher. "I don't think I'm going to be myself much longer." I looked back at the window. The creature, the dog man, was still staring at the tower, and somehow I knew it could see me just as clearly as I could see it. Then it opened its mouth and spoke. "Catherine Elise Wolcott," it said, its voice deep and strange, like several voices talking at once. It knew my full name, even my middle name that almost nobody knew. Dr. Harmon cried out in pain behind me, and when I turned, I saw his spine arching unnaturally, the bones making cracking sounds under his skin. We were trapped in the tower, with wolves circling below and Dr. Harmon, changing into something that wasn't human anymore. And outside, a monster that knew my name was waiting. I looked around the small room at the top of the fire tower, desperate to find something to help Dr. Harmon. There was an old first aid kit on the wall, some dusty maps, a radio that looked like it hadn't been used in years, and some rope in the corner. "The rope!" Dr. Harmon gasped, pointing with a shaking hand. "Tie me to the chair! Now, cat!" I grabbed the rope and started tying his arms to the armrests of the metal chair. His skin felt burning hot, like he had a terrible fever. "Tighter," he said, his voice changing, getting deeper and gravelly. "I don't want to hurt you when it happens." "When what happens?" I asked, though deep down I knew. I'd seen enough horror movies to understand what a bite from something not quite natural might do. "The change," he said simply. His eyes were different. Now, the whites turning yellow, the pupils stretching into slits like a cat's or a wolf's. Outside, the wolves continued their perfect circular march around the tower. The dogman stood watching, not moving. In the red moonlight, it looked like something from a nightmare. It spoke my name, I whispered, peering out the window. My full name. How could it know that? Dr. Harmon made a terrible sound, half groan, half growl. "It knows because it's old," he said, "very old. And it's been watching this forest for generations." I turned back to him. "How do you know that?" He didn't answer right away. His body suddenly jerked, his back arching as bones cracked. Loudly, I backed away, horrified, as his fingers began to stretch, the nails extending into points. "Because I came looking for it," he finally said, breathing hard through the pain. "I've been tracking stories of the dogman for years. Sightings all across the northern forests." Another spasm hit him, and he cried out. When he spoke again, his voice was even deeper, barely human. "My cancer," he groaned, "terminal. Doctors gave me 6 months, but the legends, they say the dogman can heal, can transform." I thought, maybe. His teeth were definitely longer now, his jaw pushing forward slowly. "You came here to find it on purpose?" I asked, shocked. "You wanted this to happen?" He nodded, sweat pouring down his face. "Not like this. Thought I could reason with it. Make a deal." Outside, the dogman lifted its massive head and howled. The sound made the windows of the tower vibrate. All the wolves stopped moving at exactly the same moment, like someone had pressed pause. Then the dogman spoke again, its voice seeming to come from everywhere at once. "James Harmon," it growled, "you sought me, now you become. The moon demands change." As if on cue, the full moon overhead seemed to pulse, growing brighter for a moment. Dr. Harmon screamed as the pulse hit him, his transformation speeding up. I could see his skin stretching, dark hair beginning to grow on his arms and neck. "What does it want?" I asked him, my voice shaking. "Pack," he managed to say through teeth that were now definitely fangs. "It's building a pack. Special wolves, chosen ones." I looked out at the wolves circling below. "Those wolves down there? They're people it changed?" He shook his head, straining against the ropes. "No, real wolves, but connected to it, under its control. Been that way for generations." The ropes creaked as his arms thickened with new muscle. I didn't think they would hold much longer. "Why me?" I asked. "Why did it say my name?" Dr. Harmon's eyes locked on mine, and despite the changes happening to his body, I could still see the scientist in there, trying to understand. "Your family," he growled, "must be from here. It knows bloodlines, remembers everyone who's ever walked these woods." That made a terrible kind of sense. My grandfather had grown up near here. He was the one who'd given me those silver bullets, told me stories about creatures in the forest that were more than just animals. Stories I'd never believed until now. The dogman suddenly moved, taking 3 long strides toward the tower. It stopped at the base and looked up, its 2 human eyes finding me through the window. "Catherine," it called again, "we have waited for the Wolcott blood to return." A cold fear washed over me. It knew my family, had been waiting for me. Dr. Harmon let out a sound that wasn't human anymore, a howl of pain as his spine cracked loudly. The ropes on one arm snapped as his muscles bulged. "Get away from me," he warned, his words slurred around his growing fangs. "Can't control much longer." I backed away, grabbing my rifle from where I'd leaned it against the wall. Part of me knew I should shoot him now, before he changed completely. But I couldn't. Despite everything, he was still a person, still Dr. Harmon. The dogman outside placed one massive paw-like hand on the tower's metal leg. The whole structure shook. "Your grandfather faced me," it called up. 50 years ago, he wounded me with silver, but he did not kill. He understood the balance." My grandfather had faced this thing. Is that why he'd given me the silver bullets? The moon pulsed again, brighter this time. Dr. Harmon's other rope snapped, and he fell forward onto his hands and knees. His body was changing faster now, his spine elongating, shoulders widening, face pushing outward into the beginning of a snout. "Run," he managed to say, the word barely recognizable. "Hide." But there was nowhere to hide in the small tower room. The only way out was the door we'd come in through, and that would lead me right to the dogman and its wolf pack. I backed into the corner, my rifle pointed at Dr. Harmon. My hands were shaking so badly I wasn't sure I could even pull the trigger. The dogman howled again, and this time Dr. Harmon answered with his own howl, higher pitched but still terrifying. The sound no longer came from a human throat. "The pack grows tonight," the dogman called. "You will join us, Catherine Elise Wolcott. Your blood is special. Your family has always been special." Dr. Harmon's transformation was speeding up. His clothes were tearing as his body grew, dark fur spreading across his skin. His face was half human, half wolf now, caught in a horrifying middle stage. The dogman slammed a paw against the tower again, harder this time. The whole structure swayed. It was testing the strength, looking for weakness. Your friend sought me out, it called to me, begged for the change, for the power to defeat his illness. The moon granted his wish. Dr. Harmon growled in agreement, no longer able to form words. He was almost fully transformed now, smaller than the dogman outside, but still much larger than a normal wolf. His lab coat hung in tatters around his new form. "And you, Catherine?" the dogman asked. "What do you wish for? What would you trade for power beyond human limits?" I found my voice somehow. "I don't want anything from you." It made a sound that might have been laughter. They all say that, at first. The moon pulsed a third time, and Dr. Harmon's transformation completed with a final series of cracks and growls. Where the scientist had been, there now crouched a smaller version of the dogman, a creature with a wolf's head, a human-like body covered in fur, and powerful limbs ending in deadly claws. He lifted his head and looked at me with eyes that still held a spark of Dr. Harmon's intelligence. But there was something else there now too, hunger, wildness, and a terrible pain. The dogman called again. "Catherine Elise Woolcott, come down and face your destiny. Become part of something greater than human. Or watch as my pack enters the town of Iron Falls tomorrow night and feasts on every man, woman, and child they find." My blood ran cold. Iron Falls was just 15 miles away. 3,000 people lived there, including families with kids. Dr. Harmon, or the creature he had become, paced the small room watching me, muscles rippling under his new fur. He didn't attack, but I could tell he was struggling with new instincts. "I won't let you hurt those people," I called down to the dogman. It tilted its massive head. "Then you have a choice to make." The moon reached its highest point in the sky, directly above the tower. Its red light shone down through the windows, bathing everything in a bloody glow, and I knew I had to decide: face the monster that had been waiting for my family to return, or let innocent people pay the price for my fear. I needed time to think. The dogman was waiting for an answer, but I wasn't ready to give one. Instead, I started searching the small room for anything that might help us. In the corner, I found a trap door in the floor, probably used to bring up supplies without having to carry them up the narrow stairs. When I knelt to examine it, I noticed deep scratches in the wood. Not recent ones, but old marks that had been there for years, maybe decades. They weren't normal scratches. They looked like claw marks, huge ones. Dr. Harmon, or what used to be Dr. Harmon, watched me from across the room, his new wolf eyes following my every move. He wasn't attacking, but I kept my rifle ready just in case. When I tried to open the trapdoor, something slid across the floor. An old leather book, dusty and cracked with age. I picked it up and saw dates written on the cover, 1886, 1937. "Catherine!" the dogman called from below. "The night grows short. Make your choice." "I need more time," I shouted back, clutching the book. The transformed Dr. Harmon growled, but it wasn't threatening. It almost sounded like he was trying to tell me something. I opened the book with shaking hands. It was a journal, the pages yellow and brittle. The handwriting changed every few entries. Different people had written in it over the years. I flipped through quickly, scanning for anything useful, and then I saw it, a drawing of the exact same creature that was waiting outside our tower. The entry was dated June 17th, 1886. It came again with the blood moon, standing 7 feet tall, half man, half wolf. It knows our names, speaks with many voices. The wolves obey it like soldiers. 2 more of our hunting party transformed tonight. God help us all. I kept reading, flipping pages faster. Every entry described the same thing. The dogman appearing during full moons, especially blood moons. People changing. Wolves acting strangely. The Entry from October 1912 caught my eye. Sheriff Miller shot it with his silver revolver. It bled and retreated but did not die. It will return, always returns. Not evil perhaps, but ancient and hungry for packmates. It keeps the Wendigo at bay, the ice spirit that haunts the northern forest. A terrible balance. Wendigo. I'd heard that word before in my grandfather's stories. A cannibalistic spirit that brought winter and starvation. The last entry in the journal was from 1937. The dogman is not our enemy. It is the guardian against something far worse. When the Wendigo stirred in 1912, hunting our children, the dogman and its pack drove it back north. We make our offering now, livestock under the full moon, and it protects Iron Falls from the ice spirit's hunger. This is the bargain. This is the way it must be. The journal ended there, but now I understood. The dogman wasn't just a monster. It was fighting something worse. And somehow my family was connected to all of this. A howl from below made me look up. The dogman was growing impatient. Dr. Harmon made a strange snuffling noise and pushed something toward me with his snout, a pen that had been on the desk. He was trying to help me. "You're still in there, aren't you?" I whispered. "Still thinking, still human somewhere inside." His eyes seemed to say yes, though his body was completely transformed now. The dogman howled again, and this time Dr. Harmon's body tensed. He was fighting something, an order, a command. The bigger dogman was trying to control him. "Catherine Elise Walcott," the dogman called. "The moon wanes. Your time grows short." I looked out the window. The dogman was right. The moon was starting to move past its peak. Dawn was still hours away, but the blood-red color was fading. Dr. Harmon suddenly lunged toward me, but stopped himself halfway, fighting against invisible commands. He backed away, whining. "He's trying to make you attack me, isn't he?" I asked. "Doctor." Harmon nodded his wolf head. I took a deep breath and made my decision. I loaded my rifle with the silver bullets my grandfather had given me. If the journal was right, silver could hurt the dogman, maybe even drive it away. "I'm coming down," I called through the window. "But I want to talk first." The dogman tilted its head, considering. "Talk, then choose." I moved toward the door, but Dr. Harmon blocked my way, shaking his head frantically. "I have to," I told him. "I have to end this." He backed away reluctantly. I unlocked the door and stepped onto the metal landing at the top of the stairs. The night air was cold now, making me shiver, or maybe that was just fear. I walked down the stairs slowly, my rifle ready. The wolves parted to let me through, their eyes glowing in the moonlight. They moved as one, like they shared a single mind. The dogman waited at the bottom of the stairs. Up close, it was even more terrifying, nearly 8 feet of muscle and fur and fang. Its eyes were the worst part, yellow with black pupils, but with an intelligence that no animal should have. "The Walcott blood returns," it said, its voice, still that strange mixture of tones. "Your grandfather understood the balance, will you?" "The journal mentions a Wendigo," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It says you protect Iron Falls from it." The dogman's mouth pulled back in what might have been a smile, showing rows of sharp teeth. "The ice spirit hungers always. We keep it north, beyond the Great Lake. This is our purpose. And the people you change, like Dr. Harmon, they become pack. They help us hunt the Wendigo when it stirs." A crash from above made me look up. Dr. Harmon had jumped from the tower and now stood nearby, smaller than the alpha dogman, but still powerful and frightening. "He sought the change," the dogman continued, "to escape his dying body. The others before him chose as well." "And me?" I asked. "What do you want from me? Your bloodline is old, strong. Your grandfather could hear the wolves speak. His father, before him. The Walcott blood has always been close to our kind. That explained why my grandfather had known about the silver bullets, why he'd given them to me. I don't want to change," I said firmly. "I don't want to be like you." The dogman stepped closer. "Then the Wendigo will come. Without enough pack, we cannot hold it back. Your town will feel winter's teeth." It was threatening Iron Falls again. I raised my rifle. "Stay back," I warned. The dogman laughed, a horrible sound like rocks grinding together. "Your weapon cannot kill me." "Maybe not," I agreed. "But these bullets are silver. The journal said silver can hurt you." The dogman's eyes narrowed. It hadn't expected me to have silver bullets. "Your grandfather's gift," it growled. "He was wiser than you. He understood the need for balance." "I understand keeping people safe," I said. "That's my job." I fired. The bullet hit the dogman in the shoulder. It howled in pain and rage, black blood oozing from the wound. The wolves scattered, their perfect formations breaking apart in confusion. The dogman clutched its injured shoulder, snarling. "Foolish human, you risk everything." I chambered another round. "Leave this forest. Don't come back." Instead of retreating, the dogman let out a deafening roar and charged. I fired again, hitting it in the leg. It stumbled but kept coming. Then, from the side, a blur of motion, Dr. Harmon launching himself at the larger dogman. The two creatures collided with a sound like thunder, rolling across the ground in a tangle of fur and fangs and claws. I backed, away, watching in horror as they fought. Dr. Harmon was smaller, but he was fast and seemed to be fighting with human intelligence as well as animal strength. The larger dogman was more powerful, but wounded from my silver bullets. They crashed through the trees, destroying everything in their path. Branches snapped, small trees toppled. The wolves didn't know what to do. Some followed the fighting. Dogmen, while others turned on each other, suddenly free from the alpha's control. I used the confusion to run back to the tower and grab the journal. Whatever happened tonight, people needed to know the truth about what lived in these woods. When I came back outside, the battle had moved deeper into the forest. I followed the sounds of fighting, keeping my distance. The wolves ignored me now, too busy fighting amongst themselves. I found the dogmen in a small clearing. Dr. Harmon was losing, bleeding from multiple wounds. The alpha dogman, despite its silver bullet injuries, was too strong. As I watched, the alpha grabbed Dr. Harmon by the throat and lifted him off the ground. With its other massive paw, it plunged into Dr. Harmon's chest and ripped out his heart. I covered my mouth to keep from screaming as the alpha dogman devoured the heart in 3 quick bites. Dr. Harmon's body fell to the ground, changing back to human form as it died. The alpha dogman turned slowly to face me, blood dripping from its muzzle. Something was different about its eyes now. They seemed to hold more knowledge, more awareness. "His memories are mine now," it spoke. Its voice changed slightly. "His knowledge joins the pack mind." It knew everything Dr. Harmon had known, including scientific knowledge, modern information, and worst of all, everything Dr. Harmon knew about me. I turned and ran, no longer caring about being brave or standing my ground. The creature behind me was more dangerous than ever. I ran blindly through the forest, trying to find my way back to the road, but every path I took seemed to circle back to the clearing where the dogmen had fought. It was like the forest itself had changed, rearranging to trap me. "Catherine," the dogman called, its voice closer now. "You cannot escape. The forest obeys the pack alpha." I tried another direction, but soon found myself back at the same clearing again. The dogman was playing with me, letting me exhaust myself before it closed in, and it was working. I was getting tired, my legs burning with effort. I couldn't keep running much longer. "Your parents died in these woods," the dogman called, speaking impossible knowledge. 25 years ago, car accident on the old logging road. You were 3 years old. You don't remember, but I do. I watched from the trees. I stumbled to a stop. My parents had died in a car accident when I was little, but I'd always been told it happened in the city, not here, not in these woods. "You're lying," I shouted. "The pack remembers all who die here," the dogman answered, stepping into view between the trees. "Your father called your mother's name 3 times before the end. Your mother sang to you as the car filled with water, a lullaby about moonlight." A memory flashed through my mind. water rising, my mother's voice singing softly, headlights shining through dark water. A memory I couldn't possibly have, buried too deep and too early to recall, unless it was true. The dogman stalked closer, its wounds already healing. "You were always meant to return here, Catherine Elise Wolcott. This forest is your beginning, and your end." I stood frozen as the dogman approached. It knew things about my parents' death that no one could know, things I didn't even know myself. The forest paths kept leading me back to this clearing, and I was too tired to keep running. The moon reached its highest point in the night sky, and something strange began to happen. The dogman stopped moving. Its body remained still, but a sort of shadow or mist rose from it, a ghostly shape that looked like the dogman, but wasn't solid. "The midnight hour grants powers beyond flesh." The misty form spoke, its voice now directly in my head rather than in my ears. "My spirit can hunt while my body heals." I backed away, but the ghost-like form of the dogman moved impossibly fast, circling me like smoke. I fired my rifle at it, but the bullets passed right through. "Silver cannot touch spirit," it laughed inside my mind. "Only flesh." I ran again, choosing a different path through the trees. This time, instead of leading back to the clearing, I found myself near familiar ground. I could see lights in the distance. The ranger station. Hope gave me new energy. If I could reach the station, I could radio for help, warn Iron Falls about the danger. I sprinted toward the lights, my lungs burning. Behind me, the spirit form of the dogman howled in frustration. It seemed it couldn't go far from its physical body, which was still healing in the clearing. I burst through the trees into the ranger station parking lot, gasping for breath. The building was dark, except for the emergency lights. I fumbled with my keys, unlocked the door and rushed inside, locking it behind me. The radio. I needed to call for help. I ran to the communication room, but my heart sank when I saw the equipment. Everything was smashed, wires torn out, screens shattered. Something had destroyed all our communication gear. The maps on the wall had been clawed as well. When I looked closer, I noticed something odd. Any mention of Outpost 7 had been scratched out. It was like someone wanted to erase it completely. A scraping sound at the window made me turn. The spirit form of the dogman watched me from outside, its misty shape pressing against the glass without actually touching it. "You cannot escape what was always meant to be," its voice whispered in my head. I backed away from the window, clutching my rifle, though I knew it wouldn't help against this ghostly form. The dogman's physical body must still be healing in the clearing, but its spirit could track me. "What do you want from me?" I asked aloud. The misty shape flowed through the window like fog, reforming inside the room. "The same bargain your grandfather accepted. Protection for sacrifice." "What sacrifice?" I demanded. "Iron Falls feeds us, livestock under the full moon. A small price for protection from the Wendigo." So that's what the journal meant. My grandfather and the people before him had made a deal. Regular animal sacrifices to keep the dogman and its pack satisfied. And in return, they protected the town from something worse. "The Wendigo stirs again," the spirit continued. "We feel its hunger reaching south. Without enough pack strength, we cannot hold it back. Your kind will be its feast." "Why should I believe you?" I asked. "You killed Dr. Harmon. You threatened my town. The man-wolf chose his fate. He sought the change. As for your town, we do not threaten. We warn. The Wendigo does not bargain. It only consumes." I thought about the journal entries, about decades of people living with this strange arrangement. If they were telling the truth, this had been going on since at least 1886. If I agree to this bargain, you'll leave the people of Iron Falls alone. Just take livestock. The misty form swirled around me. As it has been for generations, blood pays for protection. And if I refuse? Then winter comes early this year. The ice spirit descends. It starts with the children always. I shuddered. Whether the Wendigo was real or not, I couldn't take that chance. Too many innocent people would be at risk. I need to think, I said. The dogman's spirit drifted toward the door. Dawn approaches. My flesh form calls. Choose before the next full moon, Catherine Elise Wolcott. Or choose no longer. The misty shape disappeared through the wall, leaving me alone in the damaged ranger station. Outside, the sky was beginning to lighten slightly. Dawn wasn't far off. I sank into a chair, exhausted and overwhelmed. The silver bullets had hurt. The dogman, but I didn't have enough to kill it, and now I knew it might not even be the real threat. As the sun began to rise, I made my decision. I would research more about the Wendigo, about my family's connection to this forest. I would find out if the bargain had really protected Iron Falls all these years, and if it had, I would continue what my grandfather started. 3 days later, search teams found what was left of Outpost 7. The rangers' bodies were arranged in a perfect 5-pointed star on the ground, their hearts missing, but their bodies otherwise untouched. The official investigation blamed a rogue wolf pack and possible toxic exposure that had driven the animals to abnormal behavior. In my official report, I backed up this explanation. I described finding Dr. Harmon's body mauled by wolves. I mentioned his illness, suggesting that he might have been too weak to escape the attack. I said nothing about transformations, dogmen, or ancient bargains, but in my private journal I recorded everything, every detail of that night, every word the dogman had spoken, every revelation about my family's connection to these woods. Someone needed to know the truth, even if I couldn't tell it publicly. In the weeks that followed, I monitored the wildlife cameras spread throughout the forest. Most showed normal animal activity, but during the new moon, I caught something strange. Wolves, walking on their hind legs between the trees. When I mapped all the sightings and connected the dots, they formed my name. They were watching me, waiting for my answer. A month after that night, the full moon rose again. This time, something strange happened in Iron Falls. A farmer reported that 3 of his cows had disappeared overnight. The strange thing was, the barn had been locked and there were no signs of the doors being forced. The animals had simply vanished. Other reports followed. Chickens from a coop with no entry point, pigs from a secured pen, a horse from a locked stable. All taken precisely at midnight during the full moon, without disturbing any locks or barriers. I knew what was happening. The pack was taking its payment, just as it had for generations, and so far, no people had been harmed. 2 months after my encounter with the dogman, Rex came back. I found him sitting on my porch one morning, looking perfectly normal. He wagged. His tail, when he saw me, acted just like his old self. But during the full moon, I noticed something odd. No matter what position Rex was in, his shadow showed a figure standing on 2 legs. And sometimes, when he thought I wasn't looking, I caught him staring at the forest with an intelligence that no dog should have. Most disturbing of all were the changes in myself. I could hear wolf howls from impossibly far away, miles beyond what human ears should be able to detect, and I understood them. Warning calls, hunting signals, territory claims. Their meaning came to me as clearly as if they were speaking English. Sometimes in those howls, I heard my name repeated over and over, like a promise or a reminder. Winter came early that year, with bitter colds sweeping down from the north. But Iron Falls remained safe, protected by an unseen guardian that demanded its payment under the full moon. I kept my silver bullets close and my grandfather's journal closer. I learned to listen for the howls that warned of danger, to understand the patterns of the pack that watched over the town. And on nights when the moon was full and red, I would stand at my window and look out at the dark forest. Sometimes, between the trees, I would see yellow eyes watching my home, and I knew the dogman was waiting for me to fully accept my role in the ancient bargain between human and monster, between civilization and wilderness. I am Catherine, Elise Wolcott, Ranger of Superior National Forest and Guardian of Iron Falls. I carry silver bullets in my pocket and secrets in my heart. And when the wolves call my name in the darkness, part of me wants to answer. My name is Darius Walker. I'm a park ranger at Shawnee National Forest in Illinois, and I've been working here for almost 10 years now. I love my job, being outside, protecting nature, and helping people enjoy the wilderness safely. But what happened to me last spring changed everything I thought I knew about these woods, and about time itself. It was a beautiful late spring day, the kind that makes you glad to be alive. The sun was warm on my face, birds were singing, and wildflowers dotted the trails. I was heading to check out some reports from hikers about strange tree growth in one of our more remote valleys. Honestly, I figured it was probably just some unusual fungus or maybe storm damage that looked weird to city folks. As I hiked along the familiar trail, I noticed something odd. The vegetation was much thicker than it should be for this time of year. Leaves were fuller, wildflowers were blooming weeks ahead of schedule, and even the grass seemed unusually tall and lush. I made notes in my field journal and took a few pictures, whistling my favorite tune as I walked deeper into the forest. That's strange, I muttered to myself, checking my camera after taking several photos of the area. Every single picture was coming out overexposed, just bright white screens. I double-checked all my settings. Everything was exactly as it should be. I'd used this camera hundreds of times before without any issues. I took another picture of a perfectly normal-looking tree just to test it, and that one came out fine. But when I pointed it back toward the area I was investigating, bang! Nothing but overexposed whiteness again. I kept walking, feeling a little uneasy, but still determined to check out those reports. Then something happened that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. 1 minute, the forest was filled with birdsong, warblers, thrushes, and woodpeckers all doing their thing. The next minute, as I stepped past what seemed like an invisible line, complete silence. Not a single bird made a sound. It was like someone had suddenly turned off the volume in the world. The air changed too. It felt thicker somehow, richer with oxygen, making my head spin a little like I'd stood up too fast. And there was something else in the air. Tiny spores or particles floating around that I'd never seen before in all my years as a ranger. They glowed slightly when they caught the sunlight, drifting in patterns that didn't quite match the gentle breeze. I pulled out my compass, another habit from years of wilderness work. The needle started spinning around and around in continuous circles, never settling on north. That's when I checked my watch, a digital one I'd gotten for my birthday last year. The numbers on the display were going crazy, flashing between different times and dates that made no sense. 1 second it showed 3:47 p.m., which was about right, then it jumped to 12:32 a.m., then to what looked like 9:15 p.m. in the year 2047, then back to 5:22 a.m. in 1983. I tapped the glass, thinking it must be malfunctioning, but the crazy time jumps continued. "What in the world?" I whispered, my voice sounding strangely muffled. In the too thick air, that's when I noticed the trees. These had to be what the hikers had reported, but their descriptions hadn't come close to capturing how truly bizarre they were. The trees were growing in perfect geometric patterns, precise circles, triangles, and spirals that couldn't possibly be natural. I've seen plenty of strange growth patterns in my time, but nothing like this. This wasn't random or coincidental. It was deliberate, mathematical, impossible. I moved closer to examine one of the trees and noticed something even stranger. The bark was translucent, almost like thin plastic or wax paper. I could see through it to the inner layers of the tree, and what I saw didn't make sense. The growth rings were visible, but they were pulsing, expanding, and contracting like a heartbeat. The tree wasn't just alive in the way all trees are alive. It was alive like an animal, with visible systems working inside it. I reached out slowly and placed my hand against the trunk. It was warm, not sun-warmed like normal bark, but warm from within, like touching human skin. And I swear, I felt a pulse beneath my fingertips, a rhythmic thrumming that matched the pulsing I could see through the translucent bark. For the first time in my ranger career, I felt truly afraid in the forest. Not the normal, healthy caution you keep about wildlife or getting lost. This was different. This was a deep, primal fear of something fundamentally wrong with the world around me. Every instinct I had was screaming that I needed to turn around and get out of there. But I also knew I had a job to do. Something very strange was happening in my forest, and I needed to document it, to understand it, to make sure it wasn't dangerous for the people who visited these woods. So instead of running, I took a deep breath of that too thick air, pulled out my field journal again, and began to write down everything I was seeing in as much detail as possible. Whatever was happening here, I was determined to get to the bottom of it, even though I had no idea how deep this rabbit hole would go, or that I would soon discover that time itself wasn't what I thought it was in this ancient forest that shouldn't exist. I kept walking deeper into the strange part of the forest, trying to ignore how wrong everything felt. My legs wanted to turn around and run, but my brain needed to understand what was happening here. I came to a small stream that crossed the path. Nothing unusual about that. We have dozens of streams in Shawnee Forest. But as I carefully stepped across on some rocks, my foot slipped and my field journal fell into the water. "No!" I shouted, quickly fishing it out. All my notes would be ruined. But the strangest thing happened. The pages dried instantly in my hands like the water just disappeared. I opened the journal to check the damage and my heart nearly stopped. There were new notes there, in my handwriting, but I hadn't written them yet. May 17th. Found the central oak. Entity made contact. The date was 3 days in the future. There were more notes, too, describing things I hadn't seen, places in the forest I hadn't visited yet. I slammed the journal shut, my hands shaking. I needed to clear my head. I pushed forward until I reached a large clearing, and what I saw there made me freeze in my tracks. In the center of the clearing stood the biggest, oldest oak tree I'd ever seen in my life. As a ranger, I can usually guess a tree's age pretty well. This oak had to be thousands of years old, maybe 10,000 or more. That's impossible in Illinois. No tree here could be that old. The oldest trees in our forest are usually 200, 300 years at most. Around the massive oak, stone markers formed a perfect spiral pattern on the ground. They looked ancient, worn smooth by thousands of years of rain and wind. I'd worked in this forest for 10 years and never heard of any ancient stone structures here. I pulled out my audio recorder. We rangers use them to take voice notes when we're in the field. I clicked record and started describing what I was seeing. This is Ranger Walker, May 14th. I'm in the valley reported by hikers and have found... I stopped talking as I played back what I'd just recorded to make sure it was working. But what played back wasn't what I had just said. Instead, I heard my own voice having a conversation with Dr. Lewis from the university. The samples show cellular structures we've never seen before, my voice said on the recording. "And you're sure about the dating results?" Dr. Lewis asked. "Yes, the inner rings date back to the last ice age. It shouldn't be possible." I nearly dropped the recorder. This conversation hadn't happened yet. Dr. Lewis wasn't even here. I'd worked with her before on forest research projects, but she wasn't part of this investigation, at least not yet. I looked around the clearing and noticed something else strange. The wildlife was behaving all wrong. A group of deer stood at the edge of the trees, watching me. Their antlers weren't right. They grew in weird angles and shapes, and the deer never blinked. Not once. They just stared. Above me, birds flew in perfect formations, perfect triangles and circles that never broke shape. Birds don't fly like that naturally. They shift and move and change positions, but these birds maintained exact spacing between each other like they were locked in place. I walked around the ancient oak studying it when my boot hit something hard. I looked down and found a university research backpack, half buried in leaves. I opened it and found research equipment inside, high-tech stuff with the university logo. That's when I remembered something I'd heard 2 weeks ago. A team of researchers had gotten permission to study unusual plant growth in this area. I hadn't paid much attention at the time. Research teams came through pretty regularly. I followed what looked like their trail, and what I found still gives me nightmares. The research team, 4 people, were there in the forest, but they weren't moving. They were frozen in place, like statues. One woman was mid-step, her foot hovering an inch above the ground. A man was reaching for his water bottle, his fingers just touching the cap. They weren't dead. I could see their eyes moving, following me as I approached. They were conscious, but completely unable to move. Soft green moss was growing over them, like they'd been there for months, not weeks. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. I reached out to touch the arm of one researcher, and his skin felt hard, like amber or very hard plastic. They were trapped, like insects in amber from those dinosaur movies. I found their equipment nearby. Their cameras and recording devices were still working. With shaking hands, I checked what they'd captured. The videos showed impossible things, events happening before the camera was turned on. The audio recordings had conversations from weeks in the future. One recording had my voice on it again, talking about the entity and the gardener of time. I stumbled away from the frozen researchers, promising I'd get help, though I had no idea who could help with something like this. That's when I noticed my own boot prints in the soft dirt ahead of me. On a path I hadn't walked yet, I followed my own future footprints, feeling like I was in a dream. They led me to a different part of the forest, where several trees had fallen. Recently, the broken trunks oozed sap, but it wasn't normal sap. It was thick amber that hardened quickly in the air. Trapped inside were insects I'd never seen before, creatures with too many legs, or strange wing patterns that didn't match any insect I knew. Some amber chunks had pollen grains visible inside them. Later, I would learn those pollens came from plants that went extinct millions of years ago. I took out my pocket knife and cut into one of the strange trees. More amber sap poured out, and the cut made a sound, almost like a whimper, like I'd hurt something that could feel pain. I jumped back, wiping the sticky amber from my hands. As I stood there in this impossible forest, with its ancient tree, frozen researchers, and my own footprints leading me forward in time, I realized I was no longer investigating a strange report. I was in the middle of something much bigger, much older, and much more dangerous than I could have imagined. And somewhere deeper in this forest, something was waiting for me. Something that controlled time itself, something that had been expecting me. The deeper I went into the valley, the stranger things got. Time wasn't working right anymore. I checked my watch again. The batteries had been new that morning, but now the inside was full of green corrosion, like they'd been left in there for years. My flashlight, which I always keep in my pack, had the same problem when I tested it. Corroded batteries and a weak, flickering light. I touched my face and felt something that made my stomach drop. I had a beard. A real, scratchy beard. I'd been clean-shaven that morning when I started my hike. Somehow, in just a few hours, I'd grown what felt like several days' worth of facial hair. As I got closer to the center of the valley, I could feel time stretching and bending around me. Minutes felt like hours, then seconds would rush by too fast. The massive ancient oak tree seemed to pull at everything around it, like it was the center of a whirlpool of time. I knelt down to look at the ground around the giant oak. The soil, was strange, kind of see-through, like cloudy glass. Through it I could see the tree's roots spreading out in a perfect spiral pattern, going much deeper than should be possible. It was as if the oak had been growing there since before the land itself formed. I found one of the research team's journals, half buried near the oak's roots. The handwriting started out neat, but got more frantic and messy toward the end. They wrote about something they called the gardener, some kind of being made of twisted branches and roots that could control time and make plants grow however it wanted. The last entry said, "It's watching us. Always been watching, not tree, not human, something else. It tends this forest like we tend gardens, and we are just the flowers it grows." I closed the journal with shaking hands and looked up at the ancient oak. Was there really some kind of entity here, or had the research team just gone crazy from the time distortions? That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was just the tree moving in the wind, but there wasn't any wind. The branches were moving on their own, twisting and reaching. The massive trunk of the oak seemed to split open like a door, and something stepped out. I can't really describe it properly, but I'll try. It was shaped kind of like a person, but made entirely of twisted branches, roots, and flowering vines. It had no face, just a swirl of small branches where a head should be. Flowers bloomed and died all over its body as I watched. Leaves sprouted, turned color, and fell off in seconds. It was like watching all 4 seasons happen at once on this thing. I wanted to run. Every part of me screamed to get away, but I couldn't move. Not because I was frozen like the researchers. I just couldn't make myself leave. I needed to understand. The entity, the gardener, didn't speak, not with a voice, but suddenly thoughts that weren't mine filled my head. It was communicating directly into my mind. "You have come, Walker Between, as you always have, as you always will." Its words weren't really words. They were more like feelings and pictures that my brain turned into something I could understand. It showed me that this forest existed in many times at once. While the rest of the world moved forward in time like normal, this valley was an anchor point that connected to many different times at once. Past, present, and future, all mixed together. The entity reached out one of its branch arms and touched a small sapling growing nearby. In seconds, the sapling grew into a full-sized tree, aged hundreds of years in moments, then shrank back to a seed before growing again. It was showing me its power over time. "We grow special bloodlines," it put into my mind. "Special humans like you." More images flooded my brain. People throughout history entering this forest, some running in fear, some coming willingly, and all of them connected somehow. The entity guided me to a flat rock where ancient carvings covered the surface. They showed family trees, actual trees with human faces in them, spanning hundreds of years. Names were carved in languages I didn't recognize, but also in English. And there, near the bottom of one branch, was my own last name, Walker. My family name appeared again and again throughout the carving, going back centuries. Somehow my bloodline was connected to this place, to this thing. "Your blood is cultivated," the entity told me in my mind. "Specially grown to hear our voice, to see beyond the boundaries of single time." It showed me multiple possible futures, different ways my life might go, different choices I might make. But in every single one, I saw the date of my death was exactly the same. No matter what choices I made, that day didn't change. Time is not a river, it explained. Time is a garden, and we are its gardeners. I'd thought about the frozen researchers, about the strange trees, about my compass spinning and my watch showing impossible times. "What do you want from me?" I asked out loud, my voice sounding small in the ancient forest. "Why am I here?" The entity's response came as a series of images that made my head hurt. I saw myself returning to this forest again and again throughout my life. I saw other rangers with my same face from decades past. I couldn't tell if they were my ancestors or if they were somehow me, living in different times. You have always been the bridge, the entity explained, between our garden and the world of single-time humans. You have always protected us. I shook my head, confused and scared. I've never been here before today, I said. The entity made a sound like branches rubbing together, almost like laughter. You have been here many times, Walker Between. You remember only what we allow you to remember. As it spoke in my mind, I felt memories surfacing that weren't there before. Memories of coming to this valley as a child with my grandfather, who had also been a forest ranger. Memories of finding the ancient oak many times before. The entity reached out its branch hand and touched my forehead. A flood of images rushed through my mind. Things I'd never seen before but somehow remembered. The forest through different centuries, the entity growing, spreading its influence, and me, or someone who looked just like me, helping it, protecting it, keeping its secrets across decades. You belong to the forest, it told me, as your father did, as his father did. Our roots grow through your bloodline. I stumbled backward, overwhelmed by too many memories that couldn't possibly be mine. The weight of centuries pressed down on me, and I realized I was tangled in something far older and stranger than I could have imagined. The gardener, the entity of twisted branches and roots, watched me silently as I struggled to understand what was happening. And somewhere deep in my mind, a voice that sounded like my grandfather whispered, "The forest has always been there, Darius, and it will always need a walker to tend it." I needed answers. My head was spinning with these new memories that couldn't be mine, but somehow felt real. I had to find out more about this place, about what had happened to other rangers before me. Not far from the ancient oak, I stumbled across an old research station, just a small wooden cabin almost completely covered in vines. It looked like it had been abandoned for decades, but according to the sign on the door, it had been built only 5 years ago. Inside, filing cabinets lined the walls. They were filled with ranger reports dating back to when the forest was first established as a national forest. With shaking hands, I pulled out file after file, looking for anything about this valley. What I found made my blood run cold. There were reports of rangers going missing in this exact valley, going back almost 100 years. Sometimes they were found days later with no memory of where they'd been. Sometimes they were never found at all. One report from 1987 described a ranger who disappeared for 3 weeks and came back changed. He insisted only a few hours had passed for him. He quit the next day and moved away, but left behind a journal full of drawings of trees with human faces and notes about the gardener of the forest. I kept digging through the files until I found something that stopped me cold. A report from 1952 about a ranger named Michael Walker, my grandfather. He'd gone missing for 2 days while investigating unusual plant growth in the same valley. When they found him, he had no memory of where he'd been, but the report noted he had unusual growth patterns on his right forearm that looked like tree bark. He'd always worn long sleeves when I knew him as a kid. Now I wondered what he'd been hiding. As I read these reports, the entity's words echoed in my mind. Your blood is cultivated. Had this thing been manipulating my family for generations? I went back outside, determined to confront the entity. Again. As I walked, I felt a sharp pain in my right arm, the same arm where my grandfather had those strange markings. I rolled up my sleeve and watched in horror as my skin briefly took on the pattern of tree bark before fading back to normal. It didn't hurt, but seeing my own body change like that terrified me. Back at the clearing with the ancient oak, the entity was waiting. It reached out one of its branch arms and touched my shoulder. Suddenly, the pain I'd been feeling in my old war wound from Afghanistan completely disappeared. The scar that had been there for years faded away before my eyes. Then it touched my other arm, and I watched in shock as my hand aged rapidly. Wrinkles appeared, age spots formed, and my joints swelled with arthritis. But after a few seconds, my hand returned to normal. We control the flow of life, the entity put into my mind. We can heal or age, growth or decay. This is our garden. It showed me what it could do with a small bird that had fallen from its nest. The entity touched the dying bird, and instantly it was healthy again, flying away with renewed strength. Then it touched a fallen log, and mushrooms sprouted all over it, growing to full size in seconds before withering away just as fast. "What about the researchers?" I asked. "The ones who are frozen. Can you help them?" The entity's response wasn't, in words this time, just a feeling of indifference. The researchers didn't matter to it. They were just more material for the garden. That's when I noticed something disturbing near the edge of the clearing. Small cameras were set up on trees, motion-activated wildlife cameras that the research team must have placed. I grabbed one and checked its memory card. The images made me sick to my stomach. The cameras had captured the entity harvesting lost hikers who had wandered into the valley. In the photos, the entity touched the confused-looking hikers, and their bodies aged to dust in seconds. Their remains were then absorbed into the soil, feeding the strange trees. I looked up at the entity in horror, backing away slowly. "You're killing people. We transform," it corrected in my mind. "Energy changes form. Nothing is lost in the garden." With new awareness, I looked more carefully at the forest floor around me. What I had taken for unusual root formations were actually partially buried human remains. Arms and legs had become root-like, fingers elongated into thin tendrils, digging into the soil. Some still wore tattered bits of clothing, a hiking boot here, the remains of a backpack there, and most terrifying of all, some still looked fresh, as if they'd only recently been planted. "How many?" I whispered, horrified. "How many people have you done this to?" Images flashed through my mind. Hundreds, maybe thousands of people over centuries. Some native people from long ago had come willingly, offering themselves as sacrifice to the forest entity. Others were unlucky travelers who never knew what found them. I tried to run, to get away from this nightmare. But no matter which direction I went, the trails kept looping back to the ancient oak. The forest's boundaries shifted around me, keeping me trapped. I ran until my lungs burned, but always ended up back where I started. In desperation, I tried my radio, though it hadn't worked. Since I entered the valley, to my surprise, it crackled to life. But what I heard wasn't the ranger station. Somehow, I was picking up radio transmissions from different time periods all at once. A weather report from 1952, a ranger calling for backup in 1983, and a hiker. Rescue coordination from 2006, all playing over each other. I threw the radio down in frustration. That's when the entity appeared again, unfolding itself from inside a nearby tree. "You cannot leave, Walker Between," it told me. "You are part of us now. We have planted our essence in your bloodline for generations. You are attuned to our garden." The entity reached out and touched my arm again. This time, small branches actually sprouted from my skin, growing out of my forearm like I was turning into a tree. I couldn't feel pain, but the sight of it made me scream. After a few seconds, the branches withdrew back into my skin, leaving it normal again. "We are connected," the entity explained. "What happens to us happens to you. What happens to you happens to us." To prove its point, I watched as identical marks appeared on both my arm and one of the entity's branch limbs at the same time. The entity shared more with me, knowledge from all the human minds it had absorbed over centuries. It spoke in languages that had been dead for thousands of years, then switched to perfect English, then to languages I didn't recognize at all that might be from the future. "We have much to share with you, Walker Between," it said in my mind. "Knowledge across time, power beyond your understanding. I stood there trapped in this impossible forest with this ancient, terrifying entity that had somehow been manipulating my family for generations. I knew I needed to find a way out, to warn someone about what was happening here. But a part of me also wondered if that was even possible, or if my fate had been sealed long before I was even born. As the sun began to set, though time felt so weird here, I couldn't be sure if it had been hours or days since I'd entered the valley. The entity showed me something that shook me to my core. Embedded deep in the heartwood of the ancient oak was my grandfather's ranger badge. According to official records, my grandfather had died in a forest fire in 1943, years before I was born. But here was his badge, somehow inside a tree that had to have grown around it decades ago. "Your grandfather never left," the entity told. "Me in my mind. He serves the forest still." The entity stretched out its branch-like arms and made me an offer. "Become our guardian, walker between. Live beyond your normal years. Protect our garden from the outside world." Images filled my head of me living for decades, barely aging, watching over this valley. In return, I would gain some of the entity's power over time and growth. "And if I refuse?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. The response was immediate and terrifying. The entity showed me what would happen if it wasn't protected, how the time distortion would spread beyond the valley, affecting nearby towns. People would age years in minutes, plants would grow out of control, reality itself would unravel as the boundary between normal time and this place broke down. "You would let that happen?" I asked, horrified. "It is not a choice," the entity explained. "It is the nature of our garden to grow." I was trapped. If I refused, innocent people would suffer. If I accepted, I would be bound to this place, to this thing, possibly forever. In desperation, I pulled out my emergency flare gun. Maybe if I destroyed the ancient oak, the heart of this place, I could end all of this. I aimed at the massive trunk and fired. The flare shot toward the tree, trailing red smoke. But before it hit, something impossible happened. The flare slowed down, then stopped in midair. Then it began moving backward, returning to the gun as if time itself was rewinding. The entity hadn't even moved. "You cannot harm the garden," it told me simply. "Time protects us." I pulled out my knife, determined to try something else. I slashed at one of the entity's root tendrils, cutting deep into it. Instantly, an identical cut appeared on my own arm, bleeding freely. I dropped the knife in shock and pain. "We are connected," the entity reminded me. "Harm to one is harm to all." From the nearby research station, I found old park records with photographs that turned my blood cold. There I was, or someone who looked exactly like me, in staff photos from the 1930s, 1950s, 1970s, all labeled with the name Walker, but with different first names. In every photo, the Walker Ranger stood in front of the same ancient oak, wearing the same expression. And according to the personnel file I found, my birth year was listed as 1940, decades before I was actually born. I looked over at the frozen researchers again. Horror washed over me as I saw they were slowly changing. Their lower bodies were turning into root systems, digging into the ground, but their upper bodies remained human. And worse, they were still conscious, their eyes following me in silent. "Bleeding, stop this," I shouted at the entity. "Let them go." "They are becoming part of the garden," it replied calmly in my mind, as all things do here. I walked around the ancient oak, desperate for a way out of this nightmare. That's when I noticed my own initials carved into trees throughout the clearing, DW, but with dates ranging from 1925 to 2012. And the carving style was unmistakably mine. "I've been here before," I whispered, running my fingers over a carving from 1942. "How is that possible?" "You have been our guardian many times," the entity confirmed. "When you resist your purpose too strongly, we simply reset you, and you begin again." The entity showed me images that made no sense. Me, in ranger uniforms from different decades, standing in this exact spot, having this exact conversation. Same face, same person, but in different times. Sometimes I accepted the entity's offer, willingly. Sometimes I fought, but I was always here, caught in this loop through time. My camera had fallen on the ground earlier. I picked it up and checked the photos. Somehow it was working again, but what it showed was impossible. There were pictures of me in ranger uniforms from the 1930s, 1960s, 1990s, all with the same face, same expression, same position, but aging decades between frames. This can't be real, I said, but deep down, I knew it was. Somehow, I had been trapped in this cycle for longer than my normal lifetime. The entity seemed to sense my growing understanding. It softened its approach. We offer a compromise, it put into my mind. Serve as liaison between our garden and the outside world. Prevent development and intrusion. In return, keep your humanity. It showed me what this would mean. I would live a mostly normal life, but I would work to ensure this valley remained protected, untouched by development or too much human presence. I wouldn't have to stay here forever, just ensure the forest's secrets remained hidden. As I considered this, the entity showed me something else, something that broke my heart. Through the root system of the forest, it allowed me to communicate with my wife Sarah, who had died of cancer 3 years ago. Somehow, her consciousness was partially preserved in the vast fungal network that connected all the trees. It wasn't really her, not completely, but enough of her thoughts, her memories were there that I could feel her presence, hear her thoughts. The entity was showing me it could give me this connection again. This is manipulation, I said, tears streaming down my face. You're using my grief against me. The entity didn't deny it. We use what grows in you. Grief, love, duty, all are roots we can follow. I stood there for what felt like hours, weighing an impossible choice. Finally, exhausted and seeing no better option, I nodded. I'll protect your valley, I said. I'll keep people away. But those researchers, you have to let them go. The entity considered this. They know too much. But we will release them if you accept your role fully. I didn't fully trust it, but what choice did I have? What do I need to do? The entity reached out and touched my palm. A burning sensation spread across my skin, and when it pulled away, a perfect spiral pattern matching the ancient oak's root system was etched into my palm. It pulsed with a soft light that matched the rhythm I could feel from the forest around me. The mark of the guardian, the entity explained. With this, you may come and go freely. Time will flow normally for you outside our garden. But you are bound to us now, officially and willingly. The frozen researchers began to move, the tree-like transformations reversing. They looked confused and dazed, with no memory of what had happened to them. The entity assured me it would guide them out of the forest along a path where time flowed normally. I made my way back through the forest, following a path that seemed to open before me. As I walked, the time distortions faded. Birds began to sing again. My compass stopped spinning. When I finally reached the ranger station, I was shocked to discover only 3 hours had passed since I'd left that morning, despite experiencing what felt like days in the valley. My watch was permanently running. Backward now, a constant reminder of my encounter. I filed my official report, recommending the valley be closed immediately due to geological instability. I cited risk of sinkholes and potential landslides. My boss didn't question it. He trusted my judgment, and the area was promptly marked as off-limits to hikers and researchers alike. Over the following months and years, I quietly sabotaged any proposals to develop that part of the forest. When logging companies showed interest in the valley's old growth potential, I lost their permits. When new hiking trails were proposed that would cut too close to the valley, I rerouted them with claims of wildlife preservation needs. I kept my part of the bargain. And sometimes, late at night, when I couldn't sleep, I would go to the valley and speak with Sarah through the roots of the ancient trees. It wasn't really her, I knew that. But it was something, some echo of her, that gave me comfort. Years passed. New rangers came and went. I stayed on, requested the same station year after year. People noticed I aged well, but no one thought much of it. I was just the old, reliable ranger walker who knew the forest better than anyone. Then one day, a young, new ranger was going through old staff photos for a presentation about the forest's history. She found me in a staff photo from 1975, looking exactly the same as I did now, standing in front of the same ancient oak tree. She showed it to me with a puzzled expression. "This guy looks just like you," she said. "Was he your father?" I smiled and shook my head. "Just a family resemblance. The Walkers have been rangers here for generations," she nodded, but her eyes drifted to my hands. I realized too late that I'd forgotten my gloves that day. The spiral mark on my palm was visible, pulsing faintly in time with the distant heartbeat of the ancient forest. "What's that mark?" she asked. "Just an old scar," I told her, pulling my glove back on. "Nothing important." But as she walked away, I saw her looking at an old map of the forest, her finger tracing the outline of a valley that was marked as restricted. I would need to watch her carefully. The forest had chosen me to protect its secrets, and protect them I would. After all, I was a walker, and walkers had been tending this forest since before time made sense. Some burdens are passed down through blood, whether we want them or not. As I looked out the window toward the distant valley where the ancient oak grew, I could feel the forest entity's satisfaction humming through the mark on my palm. The garden of time continued to grow, and I was its reluctant gardener, bound to it by blood and choice and time itself.